I have 4 o'clock, so if we want to get started, this is April 27th, 2022, at 4 o'clock. Our board is here. One's virtual. Hi, Earl.
Hello.
Virtually Earl.
Yeah. We have the mayor, Austin, our general manager, Robin, assistant general manager, and our legal counsel. Any revisions or deletions to the agenda? Owen? Do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We'll receive the Infomark report.
Did you want to do the flag and stuff or not?
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to great stuff.
Pause.
Put the
Rewind.
welcome in there. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And a moment of silence, please. Okay. Back to the agenda. Thank you, Don.
Chris, I was worried your knee was acting up on you.
Oh, I forget. That was the reason. Yeah, you got it. I had a motion and the acceptance, so we're going to take Infomark. Gentlemen. How are you guys?
Good afternoon.
Good
We're
afternoon.
doing well, thank you.
Good.
Yes, I'll start. No real updates on headworks from our end. Regarding the filters, we have UF Train 4 was completed, cleaned earlier this year. We pulled the first 2 cassettes to UF Train 1. They've both been cleaned. We're working on the 3rd cassette. We did have a gentleman up from our new partners, ESG, that has been operating MBRs. He had worked with Suez and made some recommendations, which we implemented with the authorization of Suez. So one of them was to change the alum feed line. The alum feed line was feeding right before the membranes, and apparently that can cause some sludging to the membranes. So we moved the feed line further back to right at the end, and the 2nd stage anoxic mixers. So that's going to give the alum more time to get mixed in before it gets to the filters. So they think that that'll cut down on the alum demand as well, or the amount of alum that we have to feed.
When did you do that?
I'm sorry,
When did you do that?
last week.
Yeah,
I guess
last
could you tell right away or not?
we have had a slight reduction in our alum usage, but it will take time to see how it affects the cleaning of the membranes moving forward. So train 1 will, the next time we clean train 1, we should be able to see that more clearly. And
So basically a year. I mean, the next time we pull membranes, we'd be able to tell if it made a difference. And the second recommendation was regarding the air entrapment. We're doing a trial where we removed one of the balls from the air release valves. So it's kind of a redundant system where a solenoid valve opens to release air, but it releases it through the air release valve. So the air release valve is limiting the amount of air that can be discharged when the solenoid valve's open. So we took the ball out of one of the air release valves to see if we can get more air out, and it's undetermined whether it's made a difference yet. And I think they did that last week as well.
So is that in lieu of relocating to the drain
That we are also going to relocate the drain, the change in the drain location has to do with the false turbidity reading for
Right.
the meter. So this is in regards to the air that's trapped in the line and the excessive movement
Ah,
from the boiler pumps.
okay, so separate. from-
Separate issue, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And then I also ran a sieve test beginning of April, and results were promising. The 2 millimeter results were within Suez parameters, less than 5. The 1 millimeter results were still high. Their recommendations less than 10 milligrams per liter. We were at 44 as compared to 62 in May of 2021. So that's what's passing through the 2 millimeter screen. So, and that could be, you know, from the grinder pumps or, you know, well, it's likely that particles are ground to that, to smaller than 2 millimeters in the grinder pumps. And also, I mean, that would, prior to us putting the dewatering container online, I mean, it would take a long time probably to get all those little particles out of the sludge inventory.
Along those lines, what does Suez say about that? Because we only have a 5 mil and a 2 mil screen. So the fact that the 1 mil is there
Mhm.
isn't necessarily surprising.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I'm just going off of their recommendations. So that's, you know, but you're correct. We don't have anything in place to address particles that size. So
Can I just back up a minute here? When you said that we clean the filters, is that you guys cleaning the filters or was that outsourced to another firm?
we have 3 of our personnel and we have 3 contractors. So we're working alongside them. We have 2 racks that we can clean 2 modules at a time.
So that's a total of 6 people cleaning the filters at any given time?
Correct. Over the last 3 weeks, correct.
So one of the issues that had come up on train 4 was the lubrication of the O-rings. And, you know, we had a long discussion about that last time. Have the procedures been changed that the O-ring should be lubricated?
We have acquired the factory specified lubricant and have gone through that process following factory recommended practices.
So is it part of the training program or, I mean, how, just trying to make sure that it gets instituted?
So as our employees are continuously working, we're cycling through. So they're all actively a part of that process and learning from one another that those measures.
And I'm sorry, I should probably know the answers, but do you have a formal procedure for cleaning the filters?
When we hit the O&M manual for Suez.
So you're just using the
Yeah,
O&M manual, okay? And the lubrication is actually in the O&M manual. I'm pretty sure, I remember.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just one more question on the 6 people cleaning the filters. The 3 people that you're outsourcing this to, I assume that's a bill that would come to us. Is that a correct statement?
That's not correct. We are
Okay.
fielding those costs.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any more questions on the filters?
No.
Okay, moving on to the pump stations. The automatic transfer switch has been received for pump station 8. We're working on getting that scheduled. Should occur sometime in May. Infomark replaced the discharge and external check valves at PS4 for both pumps 1 and 2, which resolved the priming issue for pump 1. So we've had pump 1 online. When we were working through that process and put pump 2 back online, pump 2 became clogged. So we had a significant clog in the suction line of pump 2. We spent several weeks, 2 weeks, 2 to 3 guys, trying to get this clog out. We ended up having to bring the level totally down, do a confined space entry. There was a huge rag ball at the end of the suction line. And then there was also clogging within the 290s of the suction line.
I think, Austin, you mentioned that maybe there's some gauze and things like that in there that you could identify.
Yes, I have some pictures and I actually have the sample in the back of my truck for you guys to be able to observe at your leisure.
I don't want to take a look at them.
Bring it in.
So we had the guys hose it down so you can identify, you can see that it's gauze, ace bandage, stuff like that.
So, did you get a feel for whether it was more than just household usage, or could you tell that it'd be a lot of household usage to clog a pump, I think?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a combination between, cleaning wipes and other materials, but it was clearly identifiable, some medical type waste that was incorporated in that causing the clogging issue.
Staying on that topic, I know there are no violations for the month, and I understand that, but there was no mention in the report about the 5-day notice on this.
Okay, sure. There was a 5-day notice, and I believe mentioned that in last meeting that I had to submit that just for documentation, saying no negative repercussions or had come from that. It was simply for formally informing the state of.
And has there been any response back or anything from DENREC?
No, there was no need. It was just a formal documenting of the incident.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure in the since last month that there was no commentary back or.
No, no.
Okay. Staying on pump station 4, we did solicit proposals to put the clean outs in the suction lines, which Austin has approved. Work is being scheduled to complete that. The contractor's waiting on the parts, the fittings. So it should make it easier for us to resolve the clogging issues, but it doesn't solve the problem. I mean, it's still going to be a problem. To access those clean outs, we'll have to have the wet well pump down using the bypass pump, I assume, to a level where we can access them. So it is, hopefully will make things easier to get unclogged, but it's not going to resolve the issues with the excessive amounts of rags. And then a proposal from Sprigg was accepted by Austin to replace the internal piping to the wet well at pump station 9. And we're waiting on a proposal to do the same thing for pump station 2.
That's a bypass too. So it's the internal piping and into install bypass.
Then just
Where's the bypass going to be installed physically?
Yes, it's going to be.
It should be in
trying to be
it should be in the grassy area
Next to the-
adjacent to the control panel off of the road. So that way we can.
And then regarding pump station 3, we're just want to remind the board that we're waiting on a solution there as far as the two obsolete pumps that are past the end of their useful life, and there's no bypass fittings there, so it is something that we think is a critical issue and needs to be addressed. Questions?
Just the one, we've talked about this before, The graphs that are at the end are very helpful, the trending. But we had asked to put the NPDES limit just as a line across them so that you have both the data
Okay,
and what the limits
sure.
are. I mean, it's just a simple request. Thank
Sure,
you.
sure. Thank you.
And this is, or I apologize, but I've lost a page over here, but I thought I remember seeing that there was a fair amount of liquid that was hauled away. Are the drying beds, first of all, is that an accurate statement?
Yes.
Is there an issue with the drying beds? I would have thought with better weather that wouldn't necessarily be the case.
It is all weather dependent, because of the fact that it takes multiple weeks for the sludge to actually be dried in the beds. Any rain then sets back that drying process, and it can actually set us back to almost from the beginning. So depending on how much rain occurs at any given time, when those beds are full, we do our best to try and mitigate that by maneuvering the sludge if it is possible, and shrinking the amount of direct impact from the rain by allowing the uncovered portion of the bed to then receive most of the rain. But it does cause us to have to pump, especially this time of year when the weather is starting to warm. Your microorganism population also increases, which requires additional wasting.
Okay,
On
thank
my
you.
initial report, I didn't have the solids data from the county, so not sure which one you have, but we did haul 102.8 wet tons of cake, which is a lot. And just to point out that, we're wasting 371,000 plus gallons. That was the total wasting for March. So, we're moving a lot of sludge. We're keeping the solids inventory where it's, recommended by Suez, which, hadn't occurred, previously. So, I mean, since we've been back in, November of 2020, we've been striving to keep that number down, and we have the inventory where it's supposed to be. So that increases our load, our demand for the beds, and ultimately for the hauling.
Austin, I know we were trying to get a belt dryer from the county. Are we able to procure that at this point?
I could probably get it back pretty quick, I think.
Okay,
Hans has been very good to us, and I know he wanted it back in November. Oh, thanks, Robin. Yeah, so I think I can probably make a call to Hans and try and schedule it to come back.
He only needed it in the winter.
He only wanted it in the winter.
Okay.
that'd be great. Thanks.
Go ahead. On pump station 3, the T8s, which we know are obsolete at this point, we got the quote for just the rotating assemblies,
Correct.
but then we need the valves.
Correct.
Now
So both internal and then external, because the valving internally are inoperable. We need to, it would be prudent to put external isolation valves, so that way the force main doesn't backfeed into the station, as well as putting in a bypass for redundancy, especially with the present obsolete, the fact that those pumps are obsolete at this point.
So the external then plays into the potholing, which you had provided a quote for through Sprig.
The potholing.
Yeah, it's just when we got in touch with GMB because of trying to identify what's underneath that whole area, that little grass strip.
Yes, you're talking about the hydraulic.
Yeah.
Yes, the hydraulic exploration. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, the T8s, we get a new rotating assembly, replace the valves, and, we could get the motors rebuilt. That would be a low capital solution until you know, a long-term decision could be made on that pump station.
We haven't got any prices on new pumps for there yet, have we?
We did from Hills, I
We
believe.
did?
What was that? Was
Yeah,
that,
it was like
70?
78,000.
that was for the newer Gorman Rups, I believe.
Okay. But we'd still need the valves, so that's still
Right.
a piece to it, yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
think their quote included replacing the valves, I believe. Hills quote, but not.
External, internally, but not.
And
external.
that was prior to us understanding that there was no isolation of the force main backfeeding as well, so.
yeah, I mean, the concern, well, I mean, obviously, what you're pointing out, you know, replacing the rotating element is great as a short term, but it does nothing for the wear ring and the casing, which, you know, is at risk. So well, this whole discussion, one of the things we talked about was having whether you guys had a tracking system for all these open projects. Because we talked about, you know, at least at the board meeting, a summary level of what's outstanding, what's the next action, what's the schedule for completion or the next action. You know, something so that we have more visibility and we're not going from memory. So,
I mean, I put the projects on our monthly report. I mean, we can't push through capital improvements. So
not just for example, these items, a lot of these items we've talked about do not show up in the monthly report.
they do.
I mean, the turbidity, I mean, there's several issues that, I mean, I can think of offhand that I did not see in the report.
He's speaking of the plumbing, the
Yeah.
replumbing of for the turbidity meters.
Right, and that's just as an example. I mean, there's the containment structures around the temporary pumps for the chemical building. I mean, the heaters in the chemical building, and weren't there someplace else where the heaters are failed? The temporary pumps that are in the manways outside. I mean, I can list and, you know, a status of where that stuff is at, just so that we have visibility of it.
Understood. I mean, for the purposes of report, I'm, focusing on the major items, but, we can put something like that together.
And what it really is that, you know, you have that and you could share it with Austin, not something that we necessarily have to all discuss or be in detail at the meeting, but I need the confidence that these items aren't falling by the wayside.
We'll be going over that next Wednesday. So Paul was up. We went through all the pump stations, plant, put that all in a spreadsheet. Utilizing what we already had and updating it with costs of replacement, and that's all ready and will be presented to you guys on.
Okay, great, because what Paul had showed us last time
Yeah,
was,
it was a very sophisticated
yeah,
maintenance program. Is that what we're moving towards? The thing that he does, the maintenance program that,
Well, his is like an asset assessment tool, with a 10-year
Condition assessment.
condition assessment.
is that what we're working towards? Is that?
Well, we
is that
have
the goal?
a computerized maintenance management system that puts out work orders
Okay.
that we complete.
Okay. But Paul will be speaking to that Wednesday when we meet.
Well, this is different from that. So he went through every piece of equipment, put a lifespan on it and a replacement cost, like a 10-year condition assessment.
Anything else from Mike or Richard? All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Okay, we're on to item 6. That's the president's report. I would like to say one thing. There's been a lot said recently about Donovan Smith. And we've come a long way. We're not quite there yet, but we're almost there. And a lot of people have worked on it for a long period of time. But one person that hasn't been mentioned is Mike. Mike has spent 3+ years. I mean, sometimes almost constantly over weekends and
You know more about Donovan Smith
evenings
than anybody.
and so forth. If there's anyone that we can ascribe to completing that project and getting it done, it's Mike. So I don't want us to go forward without that mention. I mean, Mary, you worked on it and others have worked on it, obviously, but Mike spent the most time putting it together, sometimes doing the things that the owners, people should have been doing, and running down the right people to talk to and get answers from, and keeping the owner on the defensive as far as trying to get information to us. He wouldn't let, you were very tenacious in going forward with a very difficult assignment. So Mike, I don't think we could end this Donovan Smith project without thanking you quite a bit. And of course,
Here's here.
Austin and Darren too did a lot of work on this thing, but Mike, you kind of took the lead to the hard part of dealing with the client, the client's attorneys, and the DENREC attorneys and so forth. But so thank you very much.
And I appreciate that, press, and it means a lot. It was certainly a team effort, though, and it was a lot of years, a lot of work, and I am going to continue to say I remain cautiously optimistic until the documents are finalized and recorded.
Well,
But that means a lot.
You did a great job. Thank you.
I would echo the same comment, but I would also say that if it hadn't been for the homeowners speaking up as they did and being the activists,
Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. They haven't gotten enough credit either.
they,
Yeah.
you know, when we had the public hearing, their impassioned plea, which was not scripted, really was very meaningful.
Now, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, item 7, general manager's report.
So April's coming to an end. We're entering and we have entered a new fiscal year. With that, we continue to be very busy. Kim is working, Kim and staff are working with the auditors going into the 21-22 audit. Construction on Pilottown Road continues. They are working and are on track to finish section 1, I would say, which is up to New Road by the 15th. There's also the second piece of the project, which is from New Road to the Lewes area. We're still optimistic that would be a mid-July finish date. And then going into the Donovan's Road work, that has been a very disruptive, and I recognize that. I believe last night they got pretty much the last piece of the puzzle when it comes to the 24/7 work. It was over 600 feet of pipe. They set 2 manholes and 2 stub outs for 2 additional manholes. And so they worked 24/7. It was I don't know if anybody was out there. It's a very tight operation. There was a lot of frustration, but we accepted that. We implemented what we could to make it the best of what we could with the space that we had. And that piece of the puzzle, the 24/7 work, is all but wrapped up. So now they're going to be going, and there's still some discussion on what the path forward is versus a jack and bore. But there's going to be a jack and bore that's going to happen from North Atlantic Drive over to the parking lot of the Teller Wines, or what currently is the Teller Wines, and then the continuation down to the bike path and across. So that work continues, still on track, still working good. And then just looking at some meetings, Tom, Earl, Robin, Josh, myself, and Kim went to Seaford for an AMI visit, had a great discussion with them. We'll talk later about that. Had our first joint meeting with the BPW and City Council, worked on existing policies with Robin and Cam and Mike, of course, and attended the comp plan meeting last night. And just as a reminder, we have the household hazardous waste and drug take back this weekend from 10 to 2.
I won't be able to be there. I've got to go down to DC for something, but so hopefully some other members of the board can make it. It's always a good event. Much appreciated by the public.
Mhm.
Just note that we are talking with Mr. Ritter. We've had a meeting,
Mr. Ritter and Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Parsons, yeah. That's the shopping center right there on the corner.
Right.
I noticed they have quite a bit of material in his parking lot there.
Yeah, it,
We
Did he,
had
did
a
he,
very good conversation with him the
Yeah.
other day.
he's okay with that?
he's very accommodating.
He's very interested
Yeah.
Good,
in annexation.
good. Okay, presentation. Item 8, presentation by Charlie O'Donnell and an overview of the city BPW stormwater management facilities.
Thank you, Press. and,
Sure, Charlie.
Board. So I guess we thought it would be a great idea just to give you an overview of what.
Could we dim the lights a little bit so we can see a little better?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if you can. What do you call that?
Oh, shift it.
Shift it. Yeah, it's got a.
It's cockeyed.
One's back there, showing.
The one back there is fine.
Oh, okay.
It's that screen.
Yeah.
Oh,
So anyway, we thought it would be a great idea. We had given this presentation to the Executive Committee on Resiliency back in November. It's just really a broad brush look at the board and city stormwater management system. And when I say stormwater management, I'm talking about mainly catch basins and storm drain piping. Obviously, the stormwater management devices, as we call them in the engineering industry, such as ponds and bioretention basins, they're typically the responsibility of some other entity, a homeowners association or property owner. So just want to go over, give you a sense of what your storm drain system looks like and just talk about it in general. And then you can hit me with any questions. I'll try to answer them at the end. So just some facts and figures. City of Lewes is approximately 4.5 square miles, 2,900 acres. Just like most other utility systems in the city, we have city side and beachside systems of drainage. As the board is well aware, the board maintains catch basins and pipes underneath the ground. The city maintains the streets and curbs. Just to give you some sense of what's going on with elevations on the city side, we have elevations that vary from 10 around the canal to 14 up as you move towards the high school. On the beach side, obviously, it's a completely different story. You got elevations from 2 to 11. Strangely enough, some of the higher elevations are at Lewes Beach and the lower elevations are on the canal side, which presents challenges in terms of getting that runoff from the Cedar Bay corridor out when it rains hard. The board had a study completed in 2014. At that time, there were 975 catch basins. There's probably a few more now with some development work, but that's a good, rough number. 975 catch basins around the city that you maintain. Various junction boxes, and there's outfall locations. I think it's important that you know that there's 25 outfalls to the Lewes-Rehoboth Canal, up and down the canal at various locations. And they're from varying size stormwater sheds. So when I talk about stormwater sheds, I'm talking about the acreage of area that discharges through that pipe into the canal. And you've got approximately 7 outfalls to the Canary Creek watershed. The area behind DeVries Circle that cuts underneath Savannah Road eventually discharges into the Canary Creek, Manila, McPhee, several other streets that discharge into a piping system on Savannah Road, end up in that same area of Canary Creek. Pilot Town Village, Reserve at Pilot Town, they all discharge into that Canary Creek watershed. Obviously, there's some runoff that's directed into the Delaware River and Bay Authority and DelDOT systems on Freeman Highway. So just be aware of that. Go ahead, Josh. Thank you. So I just want to go over some of the major stormwater sheds that you may or may not be aware of. This is one that I'm very familiar with because it was a project that we did probably 22, 23 years ago. But when we did Washington Avenue, we made improvements to the stormwater outfall because it's a big area of 70 acres that eventually discharges down Washington Avenue to the foot of Washington Avenue. And before we did that project, there were times when we had a heavy rainfall where there was like 2 or 3 or even more foot of rainwater just sitting at the foot of Washington Avenue at what was then a railroad bed. And so when we did that project, the board and the city took it upon themselves to improve that situation. And we did it by actually putting 2 36-inch HDPE pipes. If you go down there, there's 2 catch basins at the foot of Washington Avenue that discharge into these 2 36-inch HDPE pipes that go underneath the bike trail now. They go all the way out to the foot of Freeman Highway, and that's where they discharge. And eventually, this is the odd thing, but it works. It goes through a 24-inch pipe that DRBA had put in when they built Freeman Highway years and years ago. And that 24-inch pipe goes into a ditch on the other side. And it's a long and winding system that eventually discharges out to the Lewes Rehoboth Canal that you can see on this map here. So it works good. We haven't had any problems that I'm aware of since we did that project. Tom, you live there? You good?
Yep.
All right.
Since the floods have subsided, it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, the mayor can recall, I'm sure, that it was a regular problem down there at the foot of Washington Avenue. Yeah. Okay, Josh. Okay, so then here's another watershed. It's 40 acres on the beach side. That's the outfall right by the Savannah Road Bridge on the wheelhouse side of the bridge. And we had done a study probably 15 years ago. This has some problems in that there's a series of pipes that run basically from the opposite end of Beacon Hotel Complex to that discharge pipe. And there's sections of it that are actually reverse sloped. So it's not like free flowing gravity. It kind of, you had some stoppage and some conflict in there with reverse slopes. I don't know how that happened years ago.
Is it filled in at all?
Yes, you got some sediment buildup in there, which is, the secondary problem. So it's something that we probably want to address sometime. I think we always thought that we could coordinate it with DelDOT since it's near, or it's not in the DelDOT right away. It's actually in the parking lots, but it's something that we might be able to coordinate with when we make any improvements to Savannah Road in that area.
Pipe drains almost constantly.
That pipe,
That's probably groundwater.
Yeah, it probably
just
is,
all
but
groundwater.
there's almost always,
Oh,
when the
there's al-
tide's out, there's almost always water coming out
It's
of it.
either flooded or it's running.
Right.
yeah, because mean high tide is 2.7. And like I said before, sometimes those elevations are around 2. So, even the high tide's above some of those, the elevations at times.
But you can see by the water line, it looks like,
Yeah, oh, it's higher. Yeah,
so
it's below the
there's-
water line.
when the tide goes down, it's the pipe draining from
Exactly.
the canal flowing into it.
Yeah. When we did this study, there were several recommendations that the board actually did complete and continue to complete because they're basically maintenance issues. One is to keep that, what used to be the old mosquito ditch clean all the way from the backs of the cul-de-sacs on Cedar Avenue, all the way underneath Market Street until it gets into this piping system. And that really, as long as it's kept clean, it's helped to alleviate the problem of ponding at the foot of the cul-de-sacs. You can almost tell when they haven't been maintained or they need to be maintained because the water starts building up right at the foot of those cul-de-sacs.
Doesn't some of that flow go the other direction?
It all comes this way.
Really? I thought that ditch went up, out into the canal.
It's a
That all comes
very,
back into that.
yeah, and we replaced the pipe that goes underneath Market Street back 15 years ago to improve that, because that was a conflict where we had backups. I think it was actually failing. We actually made improvements to that. So as long as that mosquito ditch is kept pretty clean of brush and, any kind of marsh vegetation, it drains pretty well.
Every time we have a flooding storm, all kinds of crap gets washed in there.
Yeah.
I mean, from coolers to just logs and branches. and
Gotcha.
Everything. And it's seldom cleaned out quickly. I mean, it's usually months, the next routine clean out.
Yeah. So there is a subtle difference in between a typical rainstorm event and then a surge tidal event, where surge tides can definitely create that kind of elevation, water elevation surge back into cul-de-sacs and elsewhere.
So it comes down across Market into that,
It's like
the
a
wetlands,
wetlands, marsh
created
area.
wetland area. And then into a pipe.
Yeah. Yep, in front of the beacon and then all the way down through this outfall pipe. That's how it works.
And there's a leg that comes off of Massachusetts.
Yep.
That goes up and ties into that.
Exactly.
Is that the way it goes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Just a curiosity question, and Tom referenced it, looking at how high the tide goes up there normally, it looks like. And I know it happens on Gills Neck Road, it might happen on other roads where the water actually comes from the canal up the gutters and out on the road. Does that happen in other areas, or is that not the case? And if it does happen, is there a way to stop it so it's just a one-way flow, not a two-way flow?
Yeah, so for instance, I'm getting ready to show you one out at Nebraska Avenue. We put what's called a tide flex gate valve. It's not a gate valve, but it's a tide flex valve on the discharge, similar to this pipe. And that helps to keep high tides from backing up into the system. It just creates additional head so that when it rains, you have to compensate for that head. That friction of opening that tide flex up so that the rainwater can get out. So it's a little bit of an intricate design. It's not that complicated. Like I said, we did it there with success on Nebraska Avenue. So there are ways, Earl, to do that. Just need to look at each one individually and figure out the best way to do it.
Well, they're at the Canal Front Park too, the same types of.
Yeah.
And they're buried in the mud. I mean, they're halfway down in the mud. And I think they're about a 12 or larger pipe and gate, as you might want to call it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they can even open because they're actually down in the mud, the whole crimp in that gate. I don't even know that open.
Yeah, we've actually gotten away from using the swing type and just going with the nylon type, because they'll close up against a branch or some other piece of solid and still get it'll still close. Whereas those flap type gates, if something gets in there, they'll stay open and then it's not doing its job. The mud is a multi-pronged issue, I think, with dredging. I know the city does a good job of dredging that area over time, but I'm sure it does get built up in there.
But Earl, to answer your question, in the Canal Front Park, there's rain gardens throughout the park. It's totally drained by rain gardens. I mean, it backs up through those pipes into the rain gardens, at very, very high tides or storms and so forth. So you'll see water coming up out of the drains in those rain gardens.
Yeah, that's something that we can look at, definitely.
I don't know how you correct it.
Well, I would want to see what tidal elevations make that happen. If they're, greater than the mean high tide, then, that's something that we would design against. But if it's the actual regular mean high tide,
No, it's
that's
not.
an issue.
No, it has to be a major storm.
Yeah,
It
that's
has
what
to
I
be a
thought too.
major storm.
Yeah, that's what I thought
It
too.
has to be a nor'easter or a hurricane or something, but they'll come in,
Because and Earl, maybe you can answer this since you live there. Gills Neck Road, it would seem like that's got to be a very unusual high tide,
Yeah, that's pretty
because
high.
Gills Neck is pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little surprised to hear that too, along the same lines is that, because any discharge pipe to the canal is 6 or 7 or 8 feet at least below the elevation of Gills Neck Road.
Absolutely.
So
There is a low spot there in front of Dogfish in particular, I think. That's where we've seen the water kind of reverse and come back up. It's only happened once that I've seen, but I have seen it happen.
Okay.
I wonder if that's not more that there's a blockage or
Perhaps.
a trough or some, because especially up by Dogfish, that's
Very high.
very high.
Yeah.
So that may be something we need to go down and scope.
You can maybe video it, yeah.
Yeah.
Check it
Yeah.
out.
I'm glad to hear what you said about the one-way valves, because, you know, during normal events, they may work, but it's during surge events where you get debris, like Press was talking about, where those things just, they don't, and then they present a constant passage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we've gotten away from the flapper. Go ahead, Josh. You with me, Josh? All right. So this is the one that we were just talking about, the Nebraska, Iowa outfall watershed. It's a small watershed, and we just recently added Iowa to it. So it's approximately 3 acres. So it's a really good example of what we can do on the beach side with the sandy infiltratable soils, permeable soils that we see at least between Cedar Avenue to the beach. So in this case, we did Nebraska Avenue back in 2001, and we put porous asphalt paving down, and we inverted the road so that the crown is actually inverted in the middle. And then we directed all the stormwater flow to a relatively large catch basin on the Cedar Avenue side of Nebraska Avenue. And I observed that, of course, because I was so interested in it, because we designed it for years. And it was very rare that any water at all ever made it to the catch basin, because the porous asphalt's so productive in terms of its permeability, and it's still that case. But that's fine. We put that catch basin in there and actually put in storm drain pipe through CH Mason Way, and it discharges. You can see where it discharges into the canal. And that's got one of those tide flex valves on it. To my knowledge, it works really, really well. We've never had any problem with backup. We were having problems on Iowa Avenue, and it was one of 2 issues. One might have been that the porous mix that the contractor put down on Iowa Avenue, when we rehabbed that several years after Nebraska Avenue, didn't function properly. Or there's a story out there that somebody put in a well and they put all their well drillings out into the road and it clogged up the, I never saw that, but that's what I'm hanging my hat on. Anyway, to eliminate that problem, we actually put a pipe in from Iowa down to Nebraska. Interestingly enough, it just lays flat. There's a catch basin at the end of Iowa Avenue, similar to Nebraska Avenue on the Cedar Avenue side. And there's a flat pipe from that catch basin. It's 3 feet deep, and it goes into the catch basin on Nebraska Avenue. But we haven't had problems like we used to have on Iowa Avenue ever since we put that pipe in.
Out of curiosity, and you probably don't have the exact number, but out of all of the outfalls,
Yeah.
how many of them are below mean high tide versus how many are above, for this backflow surge issue? Just out of curiosity.
100%.
They're all below.
Yeah. I'd say, well, should never say 100%, but I'd say 99%. Yes.
No, that's what.
Yeah. And I would say only a small percentage of them have the tide flex type. There's probably a greater percentage that have the old flapper type. but like I said, they create problems. So when we did Bay Avenue, 2010 through 2013, just for your information, we looked at a complete beachside catch basin and storm drain piping system with several outfalls to the canal. And back then it was a cost of $4.1 million. And that was sort of when we were weighing whether to go with porous asphalt on Bay Avenue or go with, a standard storm drainage system. And at the cost of $4.1 million back then, doesn't sound like much now, does it? But I mean, I would think I did this last year's 5.5 million. And I think now even with, some of the cost surges that we're seeing, it might be even more than that. It's just not a cost-effective way to do it. I much rather for the most part use the porous asphalt. Because I think the city ended up paying, the numbers escaping me, but it was something like $400,000 more than what they would have paid for standard asphalt. But they got the benefit, we got the benefit of it being a stormwater practice as well that infiltrates. And it still performs really well. We haven't tested it in the last, I want to say 5 years, but we tested it 5 years after we installed it. When we first put down the porous asphalt on Bay Avenue, the average across about 25 different tests of infiltration through the asphalt was 56 inches per hour. So think about like a rainstorm. If we get 2 inches in an hour, that's a lot of water. Sussex Conservation District only requires 2 inches per hour if you want to use an infiltration device. So we were getting 56 on the average inches per hour, but we tested it 5 years later because we knew that effectiveness would deteriorate over time. And by like 2017, it was like 14 inches an hour, which is still great. But the underlying soils are only going to give you 3 or 4 inches per hour at the most.
And correct me wrong, but it's probably one of the worst locations relative to the sharp edged sand that gets into it.
Yeah.
I mean, because when you vacuum, if you don't vacuum it, those tight granules get locked in versus on the city side, I would think we probably would have better durability.
Yeah, there's still no ponding issue.
Yeah, it's performing really well. The worst places we have are at the beach access areas where sand gets pulled out. But the city's done a good job of vacuum. You have to vacuum clean porous asphalt, not pressure clean it. You vacuum and you pull that sand out of there. And it's been effective for 10 years now.
Be interesting.
How often is that done?
We do it at least 12 times a year. And, we try to do it at least once a month. And I think that varies according to the time of the year. And if there's a big nor'easter, then it gets done more frequently.
I know they do it in front of our house, and I feel like I see them all the time vacuuming up it, and I think it's very effective.
That's a street sweeper you see, Earl.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever seen the bay being vacuumed. That's why I
It's
question.
supposed to be done about 12 times a year. That was the agreement,
Yeah,
once a month.
Yeah.
Is it something that we own or?
No, it's our equipment.
It's your equipment?
They bought it when you did the babe.
We bought it when we bought this.
Yeah.
When we did this, yeah. We looked at.
I'm probably channeling Sumner or Crosby here, but is there any thoughts with water coming up from the bottom as opposed to down and puddling?
Yeah, you have, in order to use porous asphalt, you're supposed to have 3 feet below the bottom of the porous asphalt section. So like the bottom of the stone of the porous asphalt section, which we did have back in 2010. I think we got even more of that. I mean, it's something that we got to keep an eye on as groundwater potentially rises over there. I'm of the opinion that even if it's 2 foot 6 inches, you're still getting a lot of effectiveness from a porous asphalt system. Just because it doesn't meet the 3 foot requirement that the state requires doesn't mean it's not effective, in my opinion.
But I mean, to Earl's point, in the long term, as sea level rise increases, you lose it. And, the state of Florida. I mean, Coral Gables, we heard from,
Yeah,
and of course, they're on limestone. It's a different,
yeah,
but they have no bayfront. They have no ocean front, and they get the surge from during storm tides
Yeah.
through the limestone up.
yeah.
It's
It's something we got to track for sure.
yeah, and something that is, thank goodness we don't have to deal with, because putting a underground mat under the entire city would be probably cost prohibitive.
And as everybody knows, we had the joint meeting between the BPW and the city, and we were talking about projects, and one of them was the Cedar Avenue project, which is a behemoth. As it stands right now, 12 million, and I don't believe that includes anything related to stormwater. Through that, Anne Marie and I, and through our discussions that night, we looked for a planning grant to go and look at and study the stormwater on that side of town and see what we could come up with as an incorporation into that project. So just as an FYI, that's something that we did. And that was put in on Monday.
Yeah, that planning grant request was submitted to DNRC on Monday for that study.
And a lot of others.
Yeah, along with a lot of other projects. But, another street we did out on the beach side after Bay Avenue was Bayview Avenue, which I'm even more, I really like how it performs. If you go out there, I mean, it can be really raining hard. You go out to Bayview Avenue and it's dry as a bone. It's really performing well. And to your point, Tom, about sand and everything, that was a really good example, because the dunes there are well vegetated, so the sand doesn't come down off the dunes and get into the voids of the pores. So it really works well. I'm an engineer, so I'm conservative. So if you look closely, it slants a little,
Yeah.
it slopes a little bit this way from the houses to the dune. So that slope, in addition to the porosity of the pavement, just really works well out there.
I was gonna say the slope is actually towards the beach.
Yeah.
Is there plans to do another porosity test now that we're 5 years down?
I think we should do one. Yeah, I haven't followed up on that, but it's we don't need to do 25. I think we could take probably
just
4 or something.
A sample, because it would be nice to see how it's held up over time now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, especially as we're relying more on it the city changed the ordinances, so, we're more relying on it now. It'd be nice to get some experience.
Yeah. Yep. And part of what we'll look at for that in that study is the use of porous asphalt, at least on the connecting streets between Cedar and Bay. Go ahead, John. Okay, so this is like the biggest watershed. It's the one that discharges. If you go out to the overfalls, you'll see that, huge 48-inch discharge right where the boat's docked. And it's 110 acres, including, portions of the BB campus, HP Smith Park, all of Burton Avenue and DuPont and Painter and all those streets. It's a huge watershed. So I just want to, I don't have a whole lot to say about this one other than to let you know that it's probably the biggest watershed discharge in the city, and that you should be aware of that.
I think we've discussed this, but when we built the bay for the overfalls and we had to connect to that pipe, it was corrugated, but it was so large, it was fabricated corrugated with several sheets that were bolted together. Actually.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
But it was in pretty poor shape right there where it was coming in. I just often wondered what it's like further up. I don't know how far that corrugated, metal pipe goes up there and what kind of conditions that's
Through the parking lot. And
So at some point,
yeah.
it'd be good to do it.
Yeah.
Check
We
that
had put
pipe.
in for a grant. You probably remember this 3 years ago, I think. There was a special allocation of funding through DNREC where they really wanted to make water quality improvements on stormwater discharges. And we put in for a grant that would create wetlands somewhere in the vicinity. Darren and I hadn't quite worked it out what we were going to do, but we put in for a grant, but we didn't get the money. So we kind of put that on hold, which is like a leapfrog into what might be required when MS4 comes down the pipe. And that's
That
at least
48-inch go all the way up to the pond?
No. It goes up to Pilot Town or Front Street, Pilot Town Road, but then it just gets smaller and smaller as you go upstream. Yeah.
What is it going up Park and Ship Carpentry? Do you know?
I have that information, but I
That's
don't
all
know.
right.
off the top of
It's
my
I was
head.
just
Yeah.
wondering.
I want to say it's probably varies from 24 to 15. 15 is the minimum.
And, this discharge, this is where the overfalls is, right? This is the one that comes out in the overfalls basin.
Yes.
And even though the overfalls, when did it come back from rework? 2 years ago, about?
Roughly
3 years.
I mean,
yeah.
you go in there and you look at the amount of silting, I mean, because it's the perfect stagnant trap.
Yeah, it's terrible. yeah.
And I'm wondering how at risk this discharge is for, the silting.
Yeah, I haven't ever noticed the silt being an issue, but I guess it's something we could track, keep an eye on. I go down
Silting
and look
around
at
the
it.
overfalls, there's a lot of silt.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of silt in there,
Yeah.
but I don't remember it getting into the pipe so much.
Yeah, because I was always surprised when I looked, the couple times I've looked down to see this one, that you would think with the volume of water during storms that it would flush it out,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem to.
Well, I mean, you think of the velocity, how big that bay is that the boat's sitting in. And that's a lot of area. So that
Right, but even right around the pipe, I expected to see some scouring or something, and maybe we need to neck it down so it's
Yeah,
high
keep an eye.
velocity.
I think it flushes out the pipe, but it doesn't flush out the bay.
The bay, yeah.
The boat bay.
I agree with Tom. I would think a ton of water is coming out of there. I would think it would flush it out unless it's silty in and of itself that's coming out. It's a fair question.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on that. Okay, so we talked a lot about this. There's approximately 40 streets on the beach side. In addition to Cedar Avenue, Bay Avenue, Bayview Avenue, Massachusetts Avenue, Market Street, Midland Avenue, and alleyways. Approximately 9,300 feet of the 21,000 total footage, 44% of those city maintained roads, not Cedar Avenue, are porous now, obviously, because Bay Avenue is a really long stretch of road. And also Bayview, Nebraska, Iowa, Odessa, and the very first one we ever did in 1992, New Hampshire Avenue, which still, as far as I know, is pretty functional. I'd like to get a test on that, Tom, just to check it.
Hadn't realized that.
Yeah, the soils between Cedar Avenue to the beach, like I mentioned before, are infiltrating type sandy soils. But as you move from Cedar Avenue towards the canal and those streets, the soils get more marshy and are less permeable. So we really have to test those before we design a porous asphalt street on those. Go ahead, Josh. So this really doesn't have a whole lot to do with stormwater. Some folks get surge tide flooding and rainfall flooding confused, but you can have surge tide flooding without a rainstorm, certainly vice versa. So just to give you some sense of the vulnerable locations that the city and the board have identified through various studies. The west end of Cedar Avenue, which the city's wrapping up their DEMA-funded flood mitigation study that GMB will be giving a presentation 9:30 next Thursday here. Don't miss it on the results of that. And what we've come up with there is a recommendation. It's going to be pretty neat presentation in that we'll show what the model surge tides were during events that we all can recall, like Winter Storm Jonas, the October 2020 storms. I think there was one even last year that we were able to model. So storm events that we can all sort of recall, 2 nor'easters of 1998 that came consecutively. You know, we modeled those as they occurred without our recommended alternative, but now we can also model them with the recommended alternative in place to show you what kind of surge flooding would not have occurred if the recommended alternatives were in place. So that's next week. New road at Canary Creek Crossing was another area identified as vulnerable. DelDOT's rebuilding the bridge now, so we all pretty much know the status of that. So that'll address a lot of the problems that we have there. Savannah Road Bridge, the bridge to Cape Henlopen Drive. DelDOT did do their pedestrian and bike access project several years ago, but it really didn't address any of the vulnerability of that. And it still floods under surge tide events across Savannah Road into the parking lots on the other side. So that's one that we need to coordinate with DelDOT. And then, Tom, you've brought this to my attention a few times. Thank you. The Pilottown Road near Canary Creek. Obviously, Canary Creek is, when those nor'easter tides surge in through the inlet, it's coming straight across there to Canary Creek, and it floods that into Pilottown Road. So anyway, that's pretty much everything I had on just like a broad overview. There's several other watersheds. If you ever have an interest, just let me know. I can show you where they are.
Very good, Charlie.
Thank you.
I learned
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you,
quite
Charlie.
a bit.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The questions had to do about, a lot had to do about financing. That was talking about the monies out there for a planning grant to study it, and then planning grants usually turn into some sort of possibility for funding.
Do we have questions? Is that what you're talking
It
about?
was Suzanne asked about, are there avenues for funding?
Okay.
And that was one of the things, a lot of they encourage you to do a 50-50 matching planning grant, which then, usually turns into a project. So.
All right, new business. Item 9, open forum general discussion on water meter / pit fee resolutions.
Go ahead, Brian.
Robin?
All right, as noted, this is a discussion on the water meter / fees. Staff is kind of looking for some guidance from the board on how the members would like to move forward or proceed when we have, or if we have potential changes to these fees. Until recently, the existing cost or the existing fees that we charge for these items, which are calculated at actual cost plus 20%, covered the expenses. Well, everybody's aware of cost and how they've skyrocketed and the frequency of the price changes. We're getting a lot of quotes now that are good for 15, maybe 30 days at the most. So it's like a revolving door of price changes at a time. So it's hard to kind of keep up. Currently, we're working on some draft policies that include a section with water meters and the fees associated with it. And then it's noted as they'll be established by the board and they'll be put in the policies under the exhibit. Also, once in place, I just think the finance committee has been tasked with also reviewing maybe some of these fees along with that. And there's also been some reference here and there in certain places that fees to be established by the board by resolution. So it's kind of a hit or miss kind of thing here. What we're trying to do is trying to find a way to simplify the process and get everything kind of running on the same path. Right now, there doesn't seem to be a clear path, and it's kind of not to say hodgepodge, but we just like to get it squared away, and we just kind of like to have a discussion, try to get some guidance on what the board feels is the best way to move forward. I mean, is it through just keep them in the policy, or do we have to keep coming up with resolutions, which could be somewhat cumbersome?
So the fees are fixed at this point, and the problem is that the economics aren't fixed.
We have not, since that fee has been established, we have not experienced times as of today where you have a fluctuation when you go buy meter pits, and 2 weeks later, if you go back for the same price, that price no longer exists.
Is there any reason they should be in a resolution? I mean, how did they get there to start with, I wonder?
So the way that I understand it is through what we were working on collectively as policies. There was going to be an exhibit which showcased and alluded to all of the existing fees.
Yeah.
And through that, and Mike, you may be able to chime in, it will be easier at that point in time that you will have one exhibit that you could modify the exhibit simply through a resolution at any time or just by a board vote. In this case, we don't necessarily have that. So you have like the tariff that speaks to fees. And then you have, for example, you go to on the water side, you have a separate group of fees. So they're kind of like spread out everywhere. Mike, you want to?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to think about this, and I think it's a good question because it really, at the end of the day, the question is, how do you want to present this? Because we'll simplify the action piece. At the end of the day, the board needs to approve fees. And you can do that through motion, resolution, whatever the vehicles we talked about before. It's the action of the board that approves the fees. The next step is it's up to staff to take that action and memorialize it somewhere. So I think what staff is asking is, we understand if fees need to change, you all need to approve that, whatever vehicle that may take. Question is what does staff then do with it to memorialize it? Do you want it in a single exhibit? Do you want it in, what's the preference, the direction to staff in terms of how those fees are presented so that they're easier to understand? I think that's the question.
So is cost plus two simplified?
So I think the question, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Austin, the question is there a preference in terms of how it is presented? That's a separate question from what is the actual fee. So the water meters and the water meter pits
It's an example.
may be a different fee and a different framework than something else. I think what you're getting at is, does the board have a preference on how staff is going to, if you wanted to know what the fees are for the Lewes Board of Public Works, how do you find it? Is there a preference from the board?
Well, I thought we had talked about this and generally agreed that what made sense was to have one source and it goes on the website and it's referenced in any other supplementary permit process. Here are the fees for water. Go to the site that lists the fees, and at that site you can readily change it digitally as prices change, as the arithmetic changes. So I'm a little bit puzzled if that's still an open question or we didn't formalize it.
Well,
Yeah,
Doesn't make sense.
I agree with Richard and Tom, and I think, because I thought we had agreed that there would just be a document, whatever it is, that captured everything. But, the other point that Tom brought up, which is that I think we have two different groups of things, which is, electric rates, water rates, things that are substantial and need the board to review, hold workshops on, whatever. And then things like this, which really should be cost plus.
Yeah.
It's a material. It's
Yeah,
like
I
a
mean,
rate.
and, this is where we're not chasing our tail and going at it. So it seems like one document and some sort of, whatever we decide, cost plus or whatever formula we want to use, and direct staff then to do that.
Yeah, we don't have a rate for size pipe, for instance. I mean, that's whatever the market is, because it goes out to open bidding. This is just something the homeowners are, I guess, more directly involved in rather than a contractor.
Right.
But it's a piece of equipment, not a rate as such. So I agree. I think we get it out of the resolution and make it a policy of how it's calculated.
I think though, trying to get some insights as to how other public works around us do it.
We've
I
already,
think there was some effort on that, I think, right, Austin?
yeah, well, this goes back to the establishment of the finance committee was back in December, and then we got into the topic of policies. So there was this lull period. Chris Keller did a fantastic job, went through, did a whole look at other municipalities, what they're charging, how they're charging it, and we have that. But there's this, with there was a lot through the policy discussion, which Cam, myself, Robin, and Mike have been going through, is that there was a lot that was pushed to the finance committee, which included the review of fees. Now we're in this very unique spot where we need to make a decision on the fees, but there's still this outstanding item of pushing the fees off to the finance committee. So
if I can make a recommendation, I think, and part of this is the update. So where we talked about in terms of with the policy document, all the work that was done there, the goal is to have that document available to the board for action should you choose at the May meeting. So there are going to be, and keep in mind, the first step is taking existing policies and consolidating them into that document. That document will be the consolidation plus the changes that the board talked about, the easy ones that we wanted to revise. That is going to be presented to the board for action should you choose next month. Then you're going to have this document. And when this document is there, if there are specific items and specific policies to be sent to the finance committee or otherwise for review, you can say you're going to have a document to work off of. So that will be helpful. I think anything on this in terms of if there's an action needed because we're falling behind on the water meters, just bring that up as a single ask to the board, and then we will memorialize it. I mean, again, I would say don't get hung up on the vehicle. So the benefit of having the policy document is we're going to get away from resolution policy. It's going to be the document. But so for now, what I would just say is that if you all are lagging behind and for meters and pits, a policy or a board fee of cost plus, then I would present that as the staff's recommendation to the board. The board can act on that. And then what we'll do is that cost plus will go into the document, and then you'll just reflect it in whatever advertising you put to the public.
So we essentially, at this time, we could say we're looking for a vote to say for the water meter and pits, we would be looking at having cost plus 20%, which is how we've done it historically. But that's what we would look at, and then we would incorporate that.
Correct. That's if that staff's, just to clarify. So if what you're saying is based on your review of the issue for the costs associated with water meters and the water meter pits, staff is requesting action by the board to set the fee to be cost plus 20%.
Correct.
Could we do that now with a, well, I can make a resolution.
Well, wait a minute, Tom. Are there any other things like that that we're missing that we should be talking about? Is that the only thing?
That was the most pressing item that really needed addressed because of the cost fluctuations.
All right.
Everything else is more of like a fee for trench inspection and that kind of stuff, which we can address. But this was the most.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
we got everything.
Then I'll make a motion.
Robin, the fee, or excuse me, the cost plus 20%, is that what's in today, or is that what you're asking for?
That's what's in the day.
That's what I'm trying to understand. So if that's in today, your question really is that when you order it, or when you get it, it costs more than when you ordered it. Is that what you're saying?
The fee that exists today was established at cost plus 20%. To change that, the question is, do we have a board vote to memorialize that it is actually cost plus 20%? Because we don't have anything that says that's how it was established.
All right,
Oh,
so
okay. I thought it was cost plus 20%.
can make a motion to give that.
Right.
So I'll make that motion that we memorialize it, or whatever the wording should be, that we give them the authority to charge cost plus for meters, water meters and pits.
Cost plus 20%.
But cost plus 20%, sorry. Mhm.
And it's only applying to those particular items.
Correct.
For this issue, yeah.
Effective immediately.
Correct.
Mhm.
And
I missed that.
can we do that and make it effective immediately in this meeting?
And then we'll incorporate that.
Okay. All right. Oh, we need a second.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, Robin. Austin.
And Mike, once again.
And Mike, of course, that goes without saying. Okay, item 10, open forum, general discussion on the possibility of creating a payment plan for the Savannah Road 16 home water, wastewater, sewer customers.
So as many of you know, we did the project where we installed the force main on the backside of the properties and the water. We tapped and utilized the Mumford and Miller contract with the state or with Del Dot to put the water services on the front of the property. With that construction has been completed. There is a little bit of a lead time delay for E1 pumps, but there was a question that was brought up by a homeowner on would the board be amicable to looking at essentially a forbearance agreement, which we've had in the past, but it was tied to direct financing through the state. So Highland Acres or Savannah Place, where we essentially seeked out a loan. We utilized that loan to pay for everything. And then we had a forbearance agreement on the property. And then there was a second policy that was to be able to transfer that to the homeowner, which means it was tied to the property. So the question is that something that the board would be willing to look at? Go ahead.
Just by way of additional background, so the way, and this is per the charter, the way that expenses such as this occur, whenever there is a utility project, then the board will assess the property owners their pro rata share. That cost is due in full the moment we assess them. So the moment we send them a bill and say your pro rata share is X, that is due. If it's not paid in 30 days, then the board is authorized per the charter to put a lien on the property. And then we also have the ability per the charter to execute on that lien. So that's the framework and the way that it's set up. Recognizing if you're a homeowner and you get a bill for $30,000, that's a tough item to expect to be paid in full immediately. So what we've done is the board has a policy that if that homeowner wants to petition the board to enter into a payment plan, the board can authorize that. And on projects where, Highland Acres, where we know that there's these large bills that are going to be assessed, we have done a singular approval of a forbearance agreement. And what that does is the bill comes in, it's due once it's issued. If it's not paid in 30 days, we record a lien, but then we also record a forbearance agreement. And that forbearance agreement says, we understand the lien is there. The board is not going to take any action relative to that lien, so long as you make monthly payments in the amount of X over Y term. That's effectively what it provides. So the question here is, if the board is amenable to a forbearance agreement option for homeowners who don't want to pay in full, and then if the answer is yes, the question becomes term and interest rate. In the case of the other examples, as Austin said, they were low interest terms. I mean, the interest charge was low because there was a corresponding state program. And so that really comes to the board in terms of what that recommendation is. I don't know if staff has a recommendation on interest rate and term.
So I'll give you an example. So the amount through attorney fees, which was for the easements that were needed for this project, all of the work that was done to put the mains in, do the connections, the J account through Del Dot, and also the engineering piece comes to essential, and impact fees comes to $15,430.98. So that's all cost to date. Now remember, yes, and then remember, they have an E1 pump that they must get, and then their plumbing costs associated with hooking their individual homes up. That's all associated on, that's what they're coordinating, and each homeowner is responsible for that. Like I said, I've had a couple conversations with some on the commercial side. There's a couple commercial properties. There's a lot of them that are just going to be hooking up, paying it all at once when the E1 becomes available, and it's easy and done. There was one question from one homeowner on whether or not this would be something that the board would entertain.
So at what rate were you thinking? Did you?
Well, obviously today's market is a little bit different. I think our most recent loan was 2.25, which was the wastewater treatment plant. It was either 2.25 or 2.5, I think. So somewhere in between 2 and 3. And then the question is for how long? It'd be 10 or 20 years, I would say. This wouldn't be a 30-year one.
I mean, the other alternative is that they go to a bank and get their own loan.
Correct.
So, I'm a little concerned we're picking up being a banker for a lot of projects.
Yeah, and I, it's a couple of same type of questions, but the first one is they could go to a bank, but then there's closing costs associated with either a second mortgage or a line of credit, which is going to add to their costs. But I'm trying to think, I can only think of one example outside of Highland Acres and those type that we've done this with.
We did it with impact fees. We've never done it to where, to my knowledge, we've never done it to where the board took the initiative. And again, this was because of the location of the septic tanks versus the well fields, took the initiative for a project in which we didn't use any sort of state monies through a loan. It was our cost. So everything is essentially paid for by the Board of Public Works already. So this is just waiting for individual homes to hook up, which we have interest. We've had several people that are interested and several people that have signed contracts with plumbers and to get hooked up. There's a lead time associated with it. But then like I said, I've had one homeowner who asked regarding this possibility.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned. I think where you're going, press, is with the precedent. And would this then be something that would become more the norm? And to the point of, we're becoming the banker. And while interest rates may be 2.5% now, they're going up. And, I don't expect we're going to wind up in the 1980s, but interest rates were 16% back then. So we're,
Well, I have a question, Mike, for Mike. I'm concerned about the precedent of it, because when we do this, when we do it anytime for anybody else, they might say, well, gee, you do this normally, so I want the same thing. And now we're doing it for 500 homes.
Let me ask
I mean, what am I, you see what I'm saying?
No, and so let me ask a question and then try to answer
Okay.
your question. So the question is this a situation where they are being assessed there that every home is connecting? No.
No.
Okay, and so that will arguably be a different situation. So the idea with the forbearance agreement is that if it's a special, to answer your question, it's a special utility project. So to the extent, take the Highland Acres, where the idea there is the BPW was extending infrastructure, had a benefit, a policy benefit for every home connecting to the utility, but that came at a cost to everybody. So we're going to extend the infrastructure. They're going to have to connect. They're going to have to make the payment, and they can make it over monthly payments or they make it at one time. That's a different situation from what you're describing, which is that we are extending the infrastructure. And the question is, if somebody wants to connect, then they're asking to do it at a month. They don't have to connect. They're choosing to connect. So what I would recommend is I think given the board's hesitation of essentially being a banker in that type of a situation, let me work with staff to come forward with, and we'll present the policies as they currently exist and a recommendation for the board's consideration at the May meeting, because I think that is a distinguishable situation that's at least worth understanding how it impacts your decision.
and recognizing that we have an incentive to get everyone off of septic. It's what we want to do. And, anything we could do to assist in that without putting ourselves at risk.
And this was a unique project that was started. And if you talk to those individuals, it was started 3 or 4 years ago with a proposal for a gravity line out the front of the property. That gravity line was nearly, if not more than $50,000 just for the sewer. And that was because of the elevations is one, and also you have a duct bank and a 16-inch water main that's right there. And so it was reverse engineered. We got to the point that we're at today. We've had a couple instances where there were sale of homes in which they were approached because they had issues with, like, for example, a cesspool failure, and there wasn't public utilities available. And being that it was so close to the well field, that was why this project became a priority.
How many people are going to be hooking up initially?
So I think you're going to be, just off face value through my conversations, you're probably at 4 to 5 of the 16 pretty soon. But
That's third.
that's just off what my
Yeah.
just brief discussions. I mean, we literally just finalized.
Is this an item that they're considering, you know, whether they go ahead or not? If we offer this, feel about whether they would not do it if we don't offer?
I think it would, I don't necessarily say they wouldn't go through with it. I think it was more of just helping them out in a certain circumstance.
Mike,
I think the best thing would be is let Mike and I talk through it, because it is a unique project, and then let us come back to the board.
So the infrastructure's there. They would pay $15,000 when they hook up.
Yes, before they hook up.
But
Yeah.
in other words, if they don't hook up, they're not paying $15,000. That's all I'm saying.
Correct.
Okay.
Mike, just if there were a forbearance agreement and the lien and so on, is the possibility of the owner selling before the purchase has been completely paid for, covered in the document?
It is. The document has an acceleration clause. So if you sell, everything's due at the moment of sale unless the board approves a new forbearance agreement.
There are several commercial offices out there. How many are commercial that are going to be, how many in total are there, and how many are going to be joining that are commercial?
I think there's 5 or 6 that are labeled as commercial. One property owner owns 2 of the commercial properties. The other one's a commercial. So I'm going to say over 50% of those. So I think there's 6 total. I think there's 3 or 4 that will come on commercial.
Commercial entities as well as individuals.
Those commercial entities have not asked for this. More
I think, they
residential.
will as soon as one's available.
I wouldn't.
Well, we'll see,
You
but
can't
I'm just
forecast
saying that.
And the board already
I
has a
would.
policy regarding to a payment plan on impact fees as well. So if you, good.
Right. And so the board has these policies for these situations, and the impact fee, if you can make a case that it is, that you meet the standard for that deferral, you have that option. What we're talking about with the forbearance agreement has to be approved by the board, and it is drafted to apply to special utility projects. So it's not just anybody who wants to come before the board. It has to be an approved special utility project. So the first step becomes the board acknowledging that this extension for these homes would be the special utility project, and then affording the benefit. The big difference here from what we've seen in the past is that in the past, those have been projects where those folks have to connect. And it's by virtue of the HOA saying we're going forward, or whatever the case may be. So if it's discretionary, that's a difference. And I think that's what we need to talk about.
Where does DENREC come in on this? Because we have sewer and water available. Then are they required to connect?
Well, and that's right. And but then you're starting to get into a different policy.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking it
Right.
through.
Right. And I mean, it's no different than any other utility, where if you have, if you meet the DENREC definition of having utility available, then yes, you have to connect, and
Yeah.
their connection fee is their connection fee. And I mean, that's what
And
it
we
is.
have policies covering the timing of monetary payments. And if they're asking if we would be willing to make some kind of a deal, then our policy says, well, don't lose any money. And make it as onerous or seeming as onerous as it would give us comfort that we're going to get our money, and encourage them to go seek other sources or don't connect. and let them make the decision to walk away.
Or we can make this a one-time offer. I don't know if that would encourage any more to connect, that we'll offer this for, the next 6 months to a year or something. And if you connect, we'll do this. If not, you're on your own as far as when you connect.
Yeah, because that would
I
actually,
think offering them some advantage to getting, off of, sewage tanks, et cetera. I think there's a benefit to everybody for that. I agree that we need to have costs that are in line with what we would have to pay. We do have certain powers here. It sounds like the ability to take the property, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's some benefits that we have, but I think we can pretty easily structure together something that we would all be agreeable to. That's not giving away the farm, right? Because we don't want to have other customers to have to pay for these customers. But I'm sure we can come up with some structure that we can work out and present it in an upcoming meeting.
Do we know of any failures out there recently? And there's anybody having trouble? I know that I go to the physical therapist out there, Shore Movement. His systems, both water and sewer, are relatively new. But he has no interest anytime soon in connecting.
Several years ago, there were some concerns with some properties that were going up for sale that ran into some issues with septic inspections. I know of at least one or maybe two.
How big are the lots?
I want to say they're
I mean, could be about 100.
50. I'm going to say a
no.
little bit less than 50.
They're not big. They're not big.
They're
lots.
not big lots. And the septics are in the back. So for example, the closest one is 468 feet from the well. Our wells are 80 to 100 feet deep. So.
and to Preston's comment about making a one-time offer, that would also, because otherwise we're going to just be inventorying the costs for the future, which we're losing money on. So I kind of like your idea of making it a one-time, now or, within the next 6 months, year, whatever.
Refresh my memory, but when we did Savannah Place, it was a little bit different than Highland Acres. In that when we did Highland Acres, we actually took the water and sewer service right up into the house. So they were definitely required to hook up. But when we did Savannah Place with the water, we just took the water service to the right-of-way line. And then I thought you guys gave them a year to connect. Was that the case?
I cannot remember. That was in 2009. I know on the sewer.
No, sewer, I'm talking about sewer. I'm
Sewer,
sorry.
it was 30 days, I believe.
That was 30 days.
I believe it was
Okay.
30 to 45 days.
Okay,
After everything was installed, they had to hook up.
okay, that's, okay.
But the other things, both of those were annexed into the city. So then you get into that city charter or the charter issue of everything inside the city is supposed to be on sewer and water. These are in the county. So
Which is exactly, that's why I said that the distinction, thanks, Charlie, the distinction between discretionary versus mandatory and how that affects it. That was the key fact. So with that information, we'll talk and come back.
okay.
Thank you. Old business, open forum, general discussion of the 2022, 2023 BPW strategic goals. Tom, Earl.
So first,
Did we get these?
I apologize to everyone for the late distribution of this. And Earl, I emailed it to you.
I got it.
Got it. And so what I did was I took last year update from the strategic plan, and Austin had done a lot of the legwork beforehand, and I typed. So
Good type job.
So any of the misspellings are mine. So I don't know that we have to go through all the items. I think some of the key ones are, there's a lot of talking here about the original dispute with the city, and that, I think we made great progress on that. Austin meets regularly with staff from the city. We've had our first joint meeting with the city. And in general, it's a much more cooperative relationship now. So I think it's something we need to monitor. Um, As Austin had spoken to, we talked about, leveraging other utilities expertise. And, we went to Seaford, had mostly a conversation about AMI, but we talked about a lot of other things with them also. And, so I think we need to continue that effort to move in this post-COVID era to having more visitation to other neighboring utilities.
And Tom, to that point, when we were there, we also talked to them because they've got obviously a huge hospital sitting there with them as well. And they've gone through some of the same challenges we have that we're kind of talked about today with Infomark. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to do exactly what we're saying here.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, Earl, because the other thing we talked to them about was their relationship with the county stormwater sewer system. And we got a lot of, useful information on that. So obviously, we've been meeting with the county and working together with the county, Hans Medlar and company. So hopefully this is a new year and we can actually start to get more of this stuff done because of post-COVID.
Can I just briefly back up to
Sure.
one item about getting the story out? I think that's one thing we haven't done a lot of work. We've improved quite a bit,
Yeah.
getting online and the Facebook and all that kind of stuff. But we've got a way to go, and should at some point, we won't have to discuss this now other than just throw it out. Should we hire a company to help us with that? I mean, hire a public relations company. I hate to do that, but to get that story out once a month, something out there about us. I mean, that's just a thought that.
But yeah, I'm glad you brought it
But-
back up. I mean, obviously, the staff done a phenomenal job of upgrading the website.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that these packets are now on the web so the public can have them. And, it's just much more usable. But
When good things happen, we don't always get it out there.
Right.
And just, if we could do that, and the staff is busy. Sharon's done a great job. You have, and others. But I wonder, is there some way that we can enhance that going forward? Just a
Yeah.
comment.
so, I mean, this was just, as a starting point,
Yeah.
I think that for actions that we're going to need to
Good.
Infiltration and inflow. I mean, I think we're all aware, that's in process. We've done a lot of videotaping as the projects are coming up. We're doing major relining of both the piping and the manways. And I've been following the rainfall trend water. It really looks like the infiltration rate optically is going down. I mean, we had 3.2 inches of rain in March. And if you look at the wastewater treatment flow, it was just, bubbling around.
I noticed.
So it's one of the things actually I think we do need to think about is that we had talked about doing some better correlation on rainwater, because I'm not sure how much of it, I think we've all discussed, how much of it is rain versus tidal infiltration.
One of the things that we talked about, and I think it's going to come up in conversation as we move on, is the discussion, and Josh and I have discussed it, is the SCADA system as it relates to the individual pump stations. Currently, it's a very minute cell service. Basically gives you pump run times, which it allows you to understand how frequently the pumps are coming on and the correlation between rain events. And one of the things is obviously picking everybody's brain. So you pick the county's brain, you pick Seaford's brain, and see how others are using SCADA systems as it relates to sewer. And there is a lot of technology out there that we could really benefit from that would really create some granularity in our data. to be able to see that. And there's a lot that goes into it because Josh would have to have communication lines and we would have to have a more robust system at each one of the plants. But that also gives us a little bit more insight to fight I and to get a better understanding of even on pump station 4, when we're starting to see more of an issue with maybe possibly clogging at one of the pumps. So that's one of the things that we're going to start to really kind of take a look at, just to kind of better ourselves and better the look into the pump stations themselves. Because
Yeah, I think that's a excellent point because we have 20.
and 2 more are going to be coming online.
And you know, being able to see how the flow in each station over time. And I know we do not have the granularity with our system now. Charlie, do other places have any type of monitoring with a correlating inflow or infiltration versus pump station run?
You have
'Cause it
meters.
seems like it would be a relatively, if you have the data stream, easy thing to do.
Yeah, like Austin said, there's typically meters associated with every pump station and a SCADA system that relays that data to a central location like the wastewater treatment plant, which is really where I'd like to see us go over time, is every pump station gets down and you can see what's going on. You know, usually we just take the pump station record or flow meter records and do an analysis against, you know, what the rainstorm events were, or what the peak factors were on the charts, and that's how we come up with it.
We don't have meters on
We don't have meters on all.
No, we don't. I
The
don't have
newer
one.
ones do.
the newer ones, but I thought there was quite a few that we didn't. So we're just using, I mean, you're really using pump run time
Yeah.
and, you know, as you go to variable speed drives, that becomes more dubious also.
Correct.
Yeah, we ran an analysis when we did the Gills Neck Road project for the county sewer connection and on pump station 4. And I believe it ended up being that the peak factor was like 1.8, wasn't it, Ben?
I can't remember exactly what
It was maybe 2. So, you know, sometimes we design around 4, but that was for citywide, it was only 1.8. So, let's throw this out there. When we did the II study in 1998, the biggest culprit was the beach side, but it was so expensive to address because it's basically the entire sewer system maybe being infiltrated by groundwater. That it's, at that time, it was cheaper to treat that water at the wastewater plant, but it's something that we can probably address, you know, over time too.
But has relining costs gone down since then?
Until this year.
Well,
Yeah, relining was hardly an option back in the
Right,
days.
that's what I was saying.
Yeah, and now, yeah, I think you're probably right. It's, you know, relining is along the lines of everything else. It's gone up a little bit, but it's relatively affordable, I'd say.
right, compared to replacing lines, which was
Yeah.
the old technique.
Yeah, I mean, anything trenchless, even if it's a little bit more expensive, you get away from all that disturbance. So it's something to consider.
All right, Tom.
The next section was on engagement and, you know, I think, you know, staff routinely goes down to the wastewater treatment plant. The board tends to make more tours down there. We're GMB monthly is going down there and doing assessments now. So I think from an oversight perspective, it's improved, but obviously we still have issues there. The other one was, and Press, you had mentioned this earlier, you know, probably the major outreach we did and information was the no wipes in the pipes. But we obviously have a long way to go. We are not alone in it, as everyone is very well aware.
I don't know whether I mentioned it at the last meeting or not. But when I was in Christiana, above the toilet, there was a sign, no wipes in the pipes. Meant to take a picture of it, I didn't do it, so.
Press, we had signs made and I actually went 2 weeks ago and walked down Second Street to all the businesses and handed them out.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Did you need in the hospital, Val?
Yeah, this was in the hospital. Yeah,
Right.
in the hospital.
I remember last month you said the hospital you thought might be a source.
Yeah, no, we think the hospital might be a source, so I'd like to see them, BB have it, because
Mhm.
Ted saw something in MedStar where he was,
Mhm.
and then here at Christiana, they have them right in the hospital. So, and the advertisements about getting rid of wipes includes hospitals, so they know that that's a big issue at hospitals. So I think we're going to talk to BB and then some of the healthcare facilities around here.
Well, actually, going back to Seaford, our visit, they talked about Seaford Hospital.
Yeah.
And, that they believe that's one of their major sources also. The last two items, which is part of the outreach, we really have made no accomplishments on this last year because of COVID. And that was setting up routine meetings with large customers and HOAs. So hopefully, once again, this year, we can get back out there and start holding stakeholder meetings or exchanges with them. So new state RPS requirements. This is still ongoing. And in fact, tomorrow there is another stakeholders meeting with Senator Hansen. DMAC is taking the lead for the public utilities. I attend Senator Hansen's meetings. She's doing a phenomenal job, but it is a long uphill battle. She had really expected that we'd be finalizing the documents now, and it looks like we're months off still. So I guess the big takeaway here is that, Scott Lynch represents us at there and is extremely involved. And we're just going to have to see what the outcome is from the discussions to date. It doesn't look like it's going to be a major impact on the DMAC customers. But, she's trying to balance investor-owned utilities, the co-op, and the public utilities. And you can imagine there's some conflict there. I will say no more. Climate change. So we took the agreement to put together a mitigation committee. I've got one positive lay member. And so anyone else, because we set up the committee that has 9 people and there's supposed to be 4 representatives of the public. And I don't remember why we set the mitigation up with 9 and the finance with 7. I don't know if finance wants to transfer some of their stuff to mitigation or.
We want to be able to pay for it.
So, we're still working on that. I think I have another potential candidate that I'll talk to, and we'll go from there.
I sent you one, Tom. I can send you a couple more if you want to consider as well.
I think the one you sent me is the one I'm talking about.
Great minds think alike.
If I can interject here. So I'm looking at the mitigation resolution here and it says 7. I know we did finance committee to be 7 to 9, but mitigation we set at 7, 3 of whom include the general manager, a member of the board selected by the board, and a member selected by mayor and city council. So you have 4
That's it's 4.
public members for a
Okay.
7-member board.
But yeah, I think mitigation was set at an absolute number of 7.
That's right.
Finance was
A
a range,
That's right.
but there were 4 members of the public, and
Correct.
so
Yep.
yeah, thanks, Mike. the telecommunication lines. In my walks around town, this is getting progressively worse. And I think we really need to do some sort of outreach to the telephone and cable companies, because the amount of lines that are dropping and are just being left there, either wrapped around the poles, or a lot of the ones that are wrapped around the poles, I've wrapped, or some of them, because they were sitting across the sidewalks. And frankly, it really doesn't put Lewes in a very good light. So I don't know if we need to change something in our pole attachment procedure, holding them accountable, or what. But
We're working on it.
The answer is yes.
okay.
How about a ready to remove charge?
They actually have, there's a thing called a make ready charge that's included in some pole attachment agreements, but I don't want to spoil all the fun. So Mike.
Or just give everyone pole saws and we'll go out there. That was a joke. Financial oversight, we've hired, Kim is doing a phenomenal job on our finances. The finance board, smile, Earl.
I am.
The financial committee, my perception, and anyone else can chime in, I think we have much better visibility. The 10-year capital program, this is the first time in my tenure I've seen it with the backup and ties to which really we're paying and the plan. So I think there's a lot of kudos to go around there. As I said, during the InfoMart meeting, we've been after them to provide an open items list with tracking. I still feel uncomfortable with that. I think the general conditions down at the wastewater treatment plant, from what GMB has seen and we've seen, is much better than it was, but it is by no means where it needs to be. But I really do think we need to push on the open item tracking, and at least to get it to staff's level. So we're continuing to rely on Sergeant Lunday, GMB, and Suez has been a phenomenal asset on providing the backup to the InfoMart reports. It gives me a lot more confidence that there are knowledgeable eyes looking over what's going on. And as we all know, we've hired GHD to do reviews of the wastewater treatment facility long-term, where we go with that. We had talked about doing a post-COVID celebration for the staff, and we never got to post-COVID, so that's something we need to put back on the bucket list for this year.
Fauci announced it today. He thinks we're out of it.
Actually, he corrected himself.
Did he?
He said, we're out of the acute pandemic
Oh.
phase. So maybe the sound clips that went out.
Okay.
But he did say it at first.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's what's being passed around. And, just going back, I think communications between the city and BPW are much better than they've ever been. There's much better cooperation, and, it's nice to see that relationship being repaired.
Okay, nice work. I think it's.
So I think from this, what we need to do really is digest it down to action items, because some of this was really just.
I agree. It's a good start. Very good.
Hey, Press, can I just talk for a few minutes about maybe a way to measure Austin against these objectives? I know I'd sent it out to the board, but I don't know how widely circulated it was.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So something I've talked about before, obviously that list is a long and much needed list. What I put together is something that I've talked about it a couple of different times on how to kind of measure Austin against these different objectives. And what I've seen work in the past is there's really three different levers. One is customer satisfaction, one's employee, I always call it associate satisfaction, and then kind of project completion and financial accuracy. The way I've seen this work in the past is you actually do a survey for customer satisfaction as soon as possible in this current fiscal year. It gives us the idea to understand, what they like, what they don't like, how we might be able to improve them, either from a policy perspective or just from a process perspective inside of the organization. And then you would do a survey again at the end of the year, which would then give us the ability to assess Austin and candidly ourselves as well on what did we do to make make the customers as happy as possible. The second lever to that is really the employees, or I call the associate satisfaction. At the end of the day, our employees end up talking to many more customers than everybody on the board and everybody sitting around that table today. Much more interactions with our customers. So making sure that they've got the training they need, they've got the skill sets they need, that they've got the technology they need, et cetera, gives us the ability to really have our customers treated better, and making sure we're giving the employees through Austin the different tools and different training that they need in order for them to be successful. And then the third and final lever, and by the way, that would be done by surveys pre and post as well. So you have a very numeric ability to assess Austin. And then the third piece, which is project completion and financial accuracies. Obviously the ability to get things done, to get them done timely. This is a part that probably moves around the most, and we would have to assess it kind of independently because of all the changes that will tend to happen. With the county, with all the other situations that we're dealing with, it's a fairly flexible situation. But being able to capture customer satisfaction, telling us what we can do better, understanding where our customers think about us, it can go into the communication with customers as well. Doing that pre and post gives us the ability to see how much we've improved the customer relationships, either through policies or through training. The employee being the second lever, pre and post surveys there as well. Again, those top two things give you a very numeric ability to measure the success and strength of the organization. And then the third piece that I talked about, the financial and project completion, much more flexibility there on how we assess that based on changes that happen over the course of the year. So I don't know if this is something we can get our heads around, or someone wants to work with me on maybe a different way to look at it or whatever, but it's just a very simple, very transparent way, I think, of being able to assess the business from the customers, from the employees, and also from the financial completion aspect.
Were you thinking about doing this in-house or using somebody like RKL that has done things like this in the past?
I'd probably look to do the surveys externally, like you're saying. And again, it gives us the ability to have the benchmark. They would be able to anonymize the data, so we didn't have, employee information per se directly, tied to different ideas or thoughts. But it's just a way to make sure that, we're reaching out to the best way to know how to treat your customers is to ask them how they're treated today, right? And different things and different ideas that they have and how we might be able to improve.
Yeah. I think RKL would be right down their alley and be independent, and they send out questionnaires before for us. So
Tom Panetta, do you want to get together and you and I can maybe look at some of these and kind of present it back to the board more holistically?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Earl.
Yep.
Okay, item 12, open forum general discussion on financial committee selection. Earl, Richard, Austin, Who wants to handle it?
Austin, you have things pass out?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Richard.
I've spoken extensively with you and with Mike Hoffman, and I made up this visual, what I'm calling as a proposal for setting up the BPW Financial Committee members. Made up of 4 BPW ex officio members and 3 to 5 citizen volunteers. General manager, financial manager, treasurer, assistant treasurer for BPW, and a council person ex officio with 4 other citizen volunteers, 2 named and 2 to be determined. With the current name holders of the proposed committee members that would make up the first 7. At the bottom, I've just tried to simplify the chain of how this evolved. BPW board voted to create the finance committee and meet and review macro BPW financial issues and to make recommendations to the BPW board. This is the proposal, this piece of paper as a visual, to start that committee, to which FOIA regulations will apply. The committee will meet quarterly to comply with the BPW board's charge. Each of the 7 to 9 members gets 1 vote, and a quorum 4 to 7, 4 of 7, or 5 of 8 to 9 are required to hold meetings and to obtain a majority to formulate recommendations. This is the best, I don't know, consolidation that I could think of that might be helpful for discussion or further questions or clarifications, or acting on to permit this first gathering of the financial committee.
Well, the first question is the council ex officio really citizen volunteer?
I will take that, Richard, if I can. So right now, in the resolution, it does not call out a council ex officio member. Mitigation committee does. I think the recommendation, and I've spoken to Richard about this, spoken briefly to Earl about this. The recommendation is that before you seat the members, we actually entertain a motion that will revise the resolution to allow for a council ex officio member, and then you can seat. So you're right, Tom. It's council ex officio.
So, and at that point, then it would be the council would go ex officio, and it would become 3 to 4 citizen volunteers.
That's correct. Now, so what Richard has written here is correct. It's council ex officio, and then 4 seats for the citizen volunteers. Just the little bracket wouldn't include council ex officio. That's right.
So that the council would be a separate.
That's right.
Title. Yeah.
And I think the logic there is that, you know, having someone from city council on the board gives us the ability to have that communication back and forth. We're obviously trying to struggle with some of the same challenges and issues collectively. So I thought that we collectively thought that made a lot of sense to do that. Having somebody like Jack Lesher, I think is just a huge advantage to anybody that would be on this committee, given he's a CPA. He's also been in the chair many times. So the logic kind of is that, you know, at the end of the day, we want to make sure we can make the finance group as strong as possible, and having some of these outside influences, including Mike Hogan as well, who's incredibly talented, gives us the ability, I think, to kind of step our game up and ensure that we're doing things that kind of move us forward, maybe with a little more creativity, maybe with a little more stability. Hopefully all those things get flushed out. Nothing gets done there that won't ultimately have to be approved by the sitting board of BPW. It's just getting more inputs and ideas and thoughts on how to think about some things that might add value to the overall board's thoughts.
And I think Jack Lesher's a great person. However, to our solicitor, citizenship, is it, he's not a member of Lewes or even Delaware? No? Okay, then,
Mike's not a citizen. He's got a home here, but he's not a citizen. So it's,
Yeah, the resolution did not set a residency requirement. And so you can name
okay,
anybody.
by the way, Jack is a CPA. I know you should have CFA for Mike. Jack is a CPA. So that's a strong team.
That is, we've got some talent, that's for sure.
We do. We could do all this tonight, couldn't we?
Correct. My recommendation is that you first entertain a motion to revise the resolution. I have a motion that I would recommend. You are welcome if you so choose to say so moved. But that is the first step. The second step would then be to a motion to entertain the team as
Do
recommended.
you want to read that?
Sure. So my recommendation for the first motion would be a motion to amend resolution 21-005 concerning the creation of a finance committee by adding a member of the mayor and city council of the city of Lewes as an ex officio member, such that the committee shall be authorized to include the board treasurer, board assistant treasurer, board financial manager, board general manager, and a member of the mayor and city council ex officio, in addition to 2 to 4 members of the general public.
Somebody want to move?
I'll move that we accept that.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi,
Thank you.
Richard, good job, thank you.
And now we have to approve the members.
Correct.
Okay. Earl, do you want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we accept the members as listed.
Second.
Can we do that
Discussion.
on the question? Can we do that or, because doesn't city council have to act to choose their ex officio?
So the resolution is a member of city council. So we do not get involved in terms of how
Right.
that selection is.
No, I was more concerned about
No,
what's
this
on
is-
here.
This says Carolyn, so.
No, but what I'm saying is that we do not get involved in that. My understanding is that Earl and Richard have had those conversations. But what we can say here is, I mean, again, at the end of the day, we can say that, well, here, let's take a step back just to keep it clean to that effect. Again, these conversations have been had. We're not doing anything out of school here, but perhaps the recommendation is that we move to welcome Michael Hogan and Jack Lesher to the Finance Committee. The reason we do it that way is because everybody else would be by virtue of their office. So whatever that selection process is or the office held, they would be on.
So
I just-
move to get them as citizens volunteers.
Right. Well, you would just say that I moved to add Mike Hogan, Jack Lesher to the
Okay,
Finance Committee.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Just wanna Make sure we.
Understood. Yep, you're right.
So do we need something for the ex officio then? Or I'm confused, I guess.
So the ex officio member, from our perspective, I mean, what I will say for the purposes of
Because
the,
we just didn't mention that.
correct. So what I am saying is what the resolution requires, and from our perspective, is it just has to be a member of city council. So whatever that process is, however that selection is separate. They would serve by virtue of their office. So
Okay.
we don't have to actually name that person.
So as long
They
as,
are named per
as long
their
as the city
office.
names it, as long as the city names it, They're on it.
or whatever the process may be. I mean, it doesn't, sometimes there is a process that identifies per rules of mayor and city council or per whatever that is. This resolution doesn't specify that. It just says somebody as the representative city council is on the committee.
We don't have to vote
Keep
on
in mind that I'm an ex officio member on the city council's budget committee. Jack Lesher was that same position prior to me as well. So this is something that's happened historically.
And to piggyback off of that, and this is my point. So how is Earl a member of that committee? How, was Tom a member of the planning commission, Tom a member of the planning commission, ex officio by the board? When you all have at your annual meeting and you all have those discussions, however you set that. Again, those are all part of we, the board, don't have to establish that other than saying that seat exists ex officio.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Good job, Aaron and Richard. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Item 13, update on AMI of the recent visit with Seaford.
Take it.
Yeah, why don't you
Go ahead.
take it?
So I believe it was sometime early April. I want to say it was April 4th. We packed up our crew from Lewes, consisting of Josh, Kim, myself, Robin, Tom and Earl, and we visited Seaford. We had a lengthy conversation, great conversation. We went through their entire process of how they came to the conclusion that they needed that they needed to move forward with AMI. We talked through the good, the bad, and obviously the conversation went in all different directions. But at the end of the day, they came to a situation where they needed to make a decision on whether they replace meters entirely, which was very costly, or they moved towards an AMI. They decided to move towards an AMI. They were one of the first through the DMEC program to do so. With that, they have noticed, they gave us some insight on how to, if we do decide to move forward with a project of this caliber, how to poise it to the public, how to engage with the public. They used door hangers that basically said they were kind of like notifications on when they were going to perform a service or be out there and change a meter out. They love it on the electric side. It's created efficiencies. It's basically moved responsibility that existed for linemen to administrative staff, which was one of the interesting aspects of it. They essentially can do what they used to do through a work order, essentially what we would call a work order or service order. They do with a click of a button because they can take final readings. They can disconnect. They can do a lot through a computer. And so they have admin staff that's constantly on call 24/7. On the water side, it was a different story. Uniquely, they actually charge a flat rate, so they don't meter residential water service. It's something that they've said they've wanted to look into, but they only have about 1,000, 1,200 water customers, and they're all C&I, commercial and industrial. And so,
Really?
yeah, through this process, we did learn.
That they meter.
Correct.
Oh,
Everything else is
no.
unmetered.
Seaford is just a little bit larger than us. What did they say? 4,000 meters or thereabouts. So, yeah, but since they don't, since they charge a flat rate to residential, they only have 1,200 water meters.
Yeah. So through the 1,200 water meters, they had about 10 or 15% of them would routinely not read. And so those would have to be addressed through actually going out, pulling the pit and taking a manual reading. They are in the process of trying to change out the ERTs. They were using a certain type, and they're now switching over to a different frequency and a manufactured ERT. But if you equate what their, I'm going to say non-read rate is to how many meters that we have, you're up in the 300 to 400 misreads or no reads a month in water. So that's something to take into consideration. And every community has the ups and downs. You have to build a robust system. Their IT department, which was non-existent essentially before this project started, they brought it up to where they deem is like the new age out of the Stone Age. Fortunately, we're kind of way ahead of the game on that aspect. But there is a lot of things that would need to happen and take place to get there. I think from my end, that was the key takeaways from it. I mean, we're in a much different spot than what they were when they made their decision. But at the end of the day, there are good pieces, there are not so good pieces, but we can use them as a way of learning to not do what they did. So we're not necessarily the guinea pig.
How
Yeah,
useful is the water side?
If you talk to the public works guy, he will not sugarcoat it. So it's tough because the whole point of it is to get a better understanding of your system and to provide a little bit more data to your customers. But at the end of the day, it also comes with a burden of having to reread those meters.
Well,
And
But-
customer use, one of my questions is how do they think the customers really want it?
This is about increasing our efficiency, it's not providing data to the customer, it's preventing, from having to go out and do meter readings. So now, one of the things they did point out or suggestions was they did not prototype when they rolled it out. And, they pointed out that the angle where the transmitter is placed in the pit, the location, water in the pits, all these type of things. So there were lots of lessons learned that if they were to go back and then actually, how close the water meters are, because these are commercial customers, to the closest electric meter, because all the data is relayed through the electric meter. So one of the big takeaways I got is that on the water side, you really need to have a walkthrough and prototype and try it out in a couple of different spots to understand how reliable it is.
And to piggyback off that, how Tom described it, the one difference that we have that's a little bit different than with Seaford, we serve areas that don't necessarily have electric meters, i.e. Tower Hill. So how do they play into it? Then there was discussions because in Seaford's standpoint, their growth isn't necessarily on the level that ours is currently. But one of the questions that we asked was, okay, for you guys, does the developer put in the infrastructure for the AMI, or is that something that they do as the municipality? That's one that they haven't really got into because, again, they don't have the development that we see here on the eastern part of the state.
And on us not having all three utility services, they have areas where they've had trouble with meter readings, and what they've done is added repeaters on poles to be able to capture, so they're not reliant on the closest electric meter.
When did they do this?
2018,
Yeah,
2019.
it's been a long time.
Yeah, sounds like.
I mean, they were on the cutting edge of it.
There was some differences there. I think they have, and I don't know how many disconnects we have a month, but they have roughly 60 disconnects a month. How does that compare to us, Austin?
Most of the months were single digits. Sometimes we'll go to double digits.
Right, and that was one of the big advantages that they had, was because of that, and they realized there's differences, in the communities. But that was one of the big benefits that they had initially anyway. And that's where they really got, I think they said, Austin, they had 2 people that are basically, I've got here, two cashiers and 2 people that are backups is what they currently have in their office today.
Yeah, and Charles Anderson did try and sell us that a drive-through is the best investment he did at his new.
Is that right?
He said your customers will love it. You can just pull up. It's like a drive-through at a bank. They open the drawer up, you put it in, they shut the drawer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other,
Yes. Yes. He highlighted. He thought that this is like the trophy. The entire building was his drive-through area. Yeah.
Oh, to pay, you mean?
Yeah.
What percentage of people, your customers pay? Personally.
It's a pretty high amount.
Is it really?
Yeah.
their city hall is pretty amazing.
It
But
is.
one of the other differences in the communities, obviously, Seaford isn't as well off of a community, so they're not seeing the EV penetration there that we are, and they probably won't be seeing it. They'll probably be more on the tail end. But the AMI gives them much more granularity at looking at local distribution, the poles, the transformers, and each
But
of
what they said though, Tom, they said that they don't utilize the transformer reads. What we've got as a quote for AMI, that's not included in our numbers as well.
right. But so I just came back from the APPA conference, which was the engineering conference, and it is becoming more the standard in all of the AMI packages for that. So, it seems to me that one of the main goals is to be able to understand what the infrastructure is being stretched to make your infrastructure improvements more cost effective, rather than just going out and replacing every transformer or upgrading all your lines. What the utilities that are putting in AMI are being able to do is pinpoint their pinch points in their distribution system to be able to spend their capital money more wisely.
Would it make sense not to put the water in? When you at the beginning?
You will be running two different.
Yeah.
That's the only caveat to it. I mean,
Well, and actually the other thing that they said was doing them separately. When you did come to do the second one, you've got exactly the same mobilization and labor costs versus they did it together. And that was one of their decisions, is that the cost of implementing it is less per meter.
And how big is that cost of implementation? It's pretty large.
Their comment was that it was a heavy lift. And look, I've been all over the place on this thing. I've been for it, I've been against it, I've been for it, I've been against it. I've been back and forth on this thing, to be honest with you. Given all we have to do this year, this thing is $1.7 million. The annual cost here is $83,351. I think this is a good idea, particularly if we had, time of day rates as far as electric is concerned, but we don't have that. I'm not sure anybody in Delaware actually does. I think this is a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea we have to do this year, given all we have on our plates. I think it's a lot of money, and I don't personally see a big payback here at all from what I heard them talk through and how we are as the city of Lewes.
That the way they felt too?
They definitely felt that way on water. But if they're having 60 disconnects and they've got to manage those disconnects, that's a lot of time and effort. We're single digits on those kinds of things. I think we have the ability to get the information about who is doing EV vehicles, through with working with us in the city. I think we can figure out the loads. They don't currently do any loads for transformers as well. That's not in our math here as well. That would be an additional cost. Likewise, they've got in the $83,000. That's going to go up on average. They said that we should put in a number of 3% a year. That's coming from the people that are actually selling it. So that would be a 3% increase every year on the $83,000. Again, it might be a good idea if we had time of day rates. I think it'd be a great idea. There's no benefit to the customer in this that I can see at all. I thought customers were going to be able to read their meter and say, gee, it's a really heavy time. Let me reduce my electric load, et cetera, et cetera. That's not currently a part of this as well. So again, I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea if you have a lot of money. And I think it's not a good idea. I don't think for this year. I would recommend looking at it next year.
And I would alter an opposite opinion in that nearly 60% of the public utilities from the APPA conference have installed or are installing AMI. So we are behind the trend. Secondly, you're never going to get to time of day rates if you don't have the system in place.
Does anybody in the state of Delaware have time of day rates?
I can't answer that, but we could ask Scott.
Yeah, I would think it would either be, I mean, I don't think so, not that I'm aware of, because I was a co-op customer and I'm now a Delmarva customer. I don't believe either one of those are.
And the third aspect is, once again, this visibility, the granularity. And as our rate structure is cross-subsidizing customers, both from the time of day issue, but also from the solar issue. And, we have no visibility in how much solar is actually coming into our system. We authorize it at the permit, and then you have no visibility. So the houses that
Is that in the package that we got from them, that we would have that ability?
the AMI reads both ways. It reads the gazins and the gazouts.
And you have a higher percentage of EVs and probably will continue that too. To me, shouldn't we be going towards a time of day? I mean, isn't that a good thing going forward?
Yes, that you get EVs to charge after. And matter of fact, one of the things that was brought up at the conference was that several utilities that were presenting said that they offer discounted rates for EV charging out of peak. So if you waited until 8 o'clock and charged overnight, because you have a surplus of energy at that point.
What percentage of customers do that, you know?
I can't answer that. It was several utilities that presented, and Austin Public Power is one of them. Saw that was a real benefit to them. Now, the problem is that it's a changing market, and I don't know that we're ever, one of the things that came up in the conference also was that it's next to impossible anywhere in the country to find out where EV charging is going on.
We would have that ability by looking at permits, right? They've got to put in if they've got the higher end charging stations, right?
No,
If they go to a level 3, a level 2 is not.
no, well, they can't, no one's going to go to level 3. I mean, that's a 480 volt
I wouldn't say
charger.
nobody will.
Okay, but
Can we make that a requirement that they've got to give us that information through the city if they go to a level 2?
a level 2 is 30 amps. A 30 amp is a dryer. Anyone who's got a 200 amp or more service can easily just plug in the breaker and get an electrical inspection.
I was gonna say, so from Robin, Josh, and Kim, do you guys have anything from your side, what you thought from the visit?
Let me just say one more thing, and then we'll go to them.
Go ahead, sorry, Earl.
I asked the people who sell this to give us 3 things. What is the benefit to the customers through surveys that they've done? They came back with nothing. What is the financial benefit that we would get from it? They came back with nothing. Everything that I asked them for, from a customer satisfaction perspective to a financial perspective, and by the way, usability for the customers was the other thing I asked for. They came back with nothing. Now, I'm not saying there's not something here. There is something here, but we're going to pay an extra $45,000 just because of COVID for this. Again, I think this is something we can do. I think given all we have on our plate, spending $1.7 million plus $83,000 a year, I just think this isn't something we need today. It's something that I think would be nice to have. I don't think right now that it's a have to have.
Do you
Now, I'm
think,
sorry, you can opine with others.
Earl, do you think this is a short-term goal or a long-term goal?
I think given all we have on our plate, this is they define this as a heavy lift. It takes a lot of IT perspective. It takes a lot of work. And given all we have on our plate for this year, I think this is a step too far. I think this is going to put us at more risk of getting what we need to have done than a nice to have that I think will help us in the future. But I don't see an economic value to it at this point. But
I also agree, because I think the demographics of Lewes is a whole lot different than the average APPA member. And at the moment, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure we have all that many customers that are going to be running around reading their meters and checking into their time of day and how many dollars a day is it going to save them?
Tom, based on the package we're asking for, that's not even, they couldn't do that if they wanted to. That's not included in the package. That would be more.
Oh, well then, so the customer doesn't, really, it's about us. So either we spend it and we get a lot of bells and whistles, but the customer doesn't get really much out of it.
No, I would disagree. It's not if this was all just about us data collecting so we could gaze on our navel, that'd be one thing. But this is about being able to spend capital money more efficiently and position our infrastructure more efficiently and set up a rate structure that is more congruous. So just one question, Austin.
Unpack that for me, because I'm not as smart as you, Tom. I'll be the first one to admit that, right? Unpack that statement for me so I can understand exactly what it is, because I reserve the right to get smarter
First, before I would even think about it.
All right, well, I mean, I think we're too far, but just what is our meter budget per year? I mean, how much money do we spend on meters?
Depends on how much development that's going on.
Meter replacement. I mean, what's our meter replacement schedule?
Right now, it's not too bad, but the issue is that all the meters are basically.
They're all the same vintage.
Yes. And so you asked me that in 6 years, it's going to be a little bit
What's the
heavier.
garage loaded with meters we have out there?
Well, our previous electric supervisor was generous enough to take, when Milford did their AMI, there were some meters that Milford had that were Itron meters that no longer could be used. Some of them are only a year or 2 years old, and they do say City of Milford. But he got a hell of a deal. And so we do have some extra ones in there.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that just in the circumstance, this project, right, falls into the whole supply chain realm. We have net meters, right, for the solar side that were ordered in June, and they were delivered about 8 months after the order. So, and that was 8 meters. So there's a lot of complexities that come into it. And I asked Scott to kind of give me what he views as what would be the next step per se in trying to understand what exactly we would do next. And that was determine the scale in which, if we do decide to move forward, determining the scale of which we would implement. So is it all at once? Is it electric? Is it electric and just a little bit of water? And then that would go into determining the financing. And you can just go down those steps. But again, the conversation is leading to 2 different methodologies. One is looking into the future in which you would implement AMI today, so that when Dawn comes back in 3 years, then you can discuss time of use rates. And you can't discuss time of use rates with Dawn if you don't have AMI in place. And then obviously you have Earl that's looking at it from a different perspective.
And I don't disagree with Earl that we have a lot on our plate. And I don't think this is an urgency, but we've been talking about it for 2 years now. And I'm fearful that we're going to push it off so far down, down the line that it's then going to become more imperative. So I just think we need to keep the time frame. If we want to bring this back up and reassess it in the fall, I'm totally okay with that. It's not something I think we need to implement today, but it is something that
Can we get some more
The market
input
is-
from the other people who
Sure.
were there?
I'll just say that Seaford it was a timing thing for them. They needed to upgrade their meters. They needed to upgrade their IT system. So it made sense. For us, we already have a great IT system. We have good meters right now. And our customer service is great. They were talking about the benefits of customer service.
Earl, they're saying.
right out.
Earl, can
By the way, I couldn't hear any of that. So I don't know if I agree or disagree.
Earl, she agrees with you.
She agrees with you.
Oh, I love her.
I said, I agree with you that we have so much on our capital projects that this can be pushed off. For Seaford, it was a timing thing. They needed to upgrade all their systems. All of our systems are good right now. I think this would be a year or two down the line that we need to do this.
And, just along those lines, by upgrading our IT system, the NICS is compatible with AMI.
It is.
They were, as you said, they needed meters and they needed an IT system. So that's what pushed them in 2018. We actually have done part of the implementation, if you will.
Yeah, we did. We went to the new billing system knowing that at some point in
Thank you,
time,
Tim.
this was going to come down the line, and that's how we got to where we are. Josh,
So that's just, go, sorry, Josh, go ahead. No.
from the IT side, strictly IT. Because I know you had a good conversation with theirs.
I did. As far as the IT system goes, implementing NISC was absolutely a step in that direction. So that way, when and if we decided to pull the trigger, and move forward with it, we would already have things lined up and ready to go to help curb some of those additional costs that Seaford had to lift right out of the gate. I think they have a substantial. We're ahead of them in some things, and we're a little behind them in others. So I don't want we have come from a perspective of serving our customers today with the idea of moving in that direction, as opposed to with them, they just ripped the Band-Aid off and said, let's go for it. So I think from an IT perspective, I think that there are definitely options. We can get creative to save costs, but I think in the most part, my opinion is I kind of go a little bit more with Earl at this point, but in 6 months, I think it would definitely be something. Kicking the can down the road is a problem, because everyone wants to do that.
So just to add to that, so to date, Milford and Seaford were the two that have done it so far. The town of Middletown is doing it on the electric side and slowly implementing it on the water. Our Newcastle Municipal Services Commission, they're doing electric and water, but they actually went for SRF monies for the water side. So they kind of split their project in two. And then I believe Newark was still in discussions. Don't know about Smyrna, but that's so far you have 4 members that are moving forward with a project. And I believe there's a 5th or a 6th that are still in discussions.
Is there a security concern about going to AMI that we don't have at the moment because we don't have AMI?
So that's one of the things where I believe that we are on par with Seaford. After discussing a lot of the cybersecurity aspects, we're ready, just like NISC. I feel as though with little, from what I can see right now, with little change, we can be right where we need to be to implement AMI. When I was comparing apples to apples with a lot of their cybersecurity infrastructure, we are in lockstep with what they have.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, and that was a big discussion at the APPA conference, just not only AMI, but just the whole cybersecurity. And the feeling was that on the AMI side right now, the vendors are got it pretty much under control, but everyone is very cautious and they're getting a lot of oversight. So
Now, I'm fine with pushing it back, reconsider it next
Yeah.
year. But, we are, I think we're kind of in a unique community. I mean, we're a very lucky community. And I don't know how it is now, but several years ago, it's been a few years now, we were at the APPA conference, Darren and I, and we were for our population, we were the biggest user of solar at the time. I
Right.
think we're still a big user per capita compared to any other town in Delaware and around. And we're also a big user of EV. We have a lot of EVs for this size town. So I kind of disagree with you, Tom, that I don't think because we're maybe in better shape, I think we've got kind of things going on here that most towns don't have going on, or at least to the degree we have them. So I think, time of use, just because nobody else has it in Delaware, I think it's a goal we should be going towards. And at some point, we need AMI to do that. So I'm okay to push it off now, but I think there's a lot of reasons to get it going forward.
And these communities like Sacramento Municipal Utilities, SMUD, Austin, and other, I mean, they showed pictures and videos of pole top explosions and pad mount explosions because of EVs. Because, if you have 4 houses on that have EVs and they plug in the afternoon and peak air conditioning loads, or actually one of the towns was a winter town and it was peak winter loads. And, they said the amount of what I've seen is the amount of transformer failures is going up over time, attributable to EVs. And we may not be there yet, but this summer, who knows?
All right.
Is it possible to get meters installed that had the capability of doing that in the future, but also manage into our current environment today? Is it possible to do that as developments come online?
It's the tough part about it is that you're essentially buying meters to predict what you do in 2 years. And if you asked me that question 2 years ago, that same technology that was utilized then necessarily might not be utilized now. I'll use the example of AMI for Seaford. They used a master meter, and now they're moving to a 500 frequency Itron. And so on the water side, it's essentially comes down to the ERT itself. So they'll look at your meters and they'll say, oh, it's compatible with our system, but you have to change out an ERT. So that's easy. The electric side is different, is that you're using an Itron essentially meter that has an ERT built into it. And then you go like on the net metering side, on the solar, you can have smart meters, smarter meters, the smartest meters, and then the greatest. And it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
We've looked into it. But again, in today's day and age, depending on what meter you go with, then you go to lead times, in which I was in a situation 3 months ago where I had people installing solar and I had no meters to put in.
And, to kind of reinforce Earl's position of waiting, one of the big things right now is that EV chargers do not talk to AMI meters. And so what they're having to do is either, now EV chargers, if you get smart chargers, you can set them for the time frame. So, but they don't get an automatic signal. And there's a problem right now that the industry is too disjoint. So there is no common. And then Tesla's the wild card because Tesla won't play with anyone. So you've got E-Charge and I can't remember the other three big chargers out there. And then Tesla, who says, and although maybe Tesla will communicate by Twitter now. So, from that perspective, waiting maybe till next year, hopefully the market will start to mature and coagulate a little. But there's a lot of pressure from the meter side and the EV side to try to get something together.
Well, can we agree to push this off until this time next year to bring it up again and see where we stand? Earl, you good with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. All right, call to the public, item 14. You've been waiting patiently and I was just wondering what you're waiting for, so go ahead.
I have been.
Thank you for staying.
Well, it's been very interesting, really. I'm Barbara Curtis. I live on Chip Carpenter Square in Lewes. I had a few questions more than anything else. One is, I've been hearing a lot about the clogs in the system and how much trouble they cost or cause. Is there any provision for fining people responsible for the clogs? And if there isn't, shouldn't there be, particularly commercial users?
I need,
Yeah.
Well, it's
How are you
finding
gonna
them and
know
then
who said what?
Yeah.
it's identifying. That's the hardest part. I mean, so for example, we'll just use the hospital as a gravity feed and it doesn't go through any sort of grinder before it gets to pump station 4. Then you'll have Harbor Healthcare, which goes through a Muffin Monster, which is a grinder pump, which then ends up down at pump station 4. One of the biggest things, and you heard us ask today, was that we said from Infomark, hey, can you get us pictures or something that's identifiable so that we can actually see what that makeup is? And it's terrible because you're essentially asking to see what's being flushed down the toilet.
Right.
But that helps us identify kind of areas, and then you can see that, this isn't necessarily being ground up. So there's a chance that if it's not being ground up, can you track that back to it's not going through a grinder, and then
Yeah.
it's like an investigation.
Okay, but you would be allowed to fine someone for putting non-permitted waste down the toilet.
There's a legal question. We got turned to our.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, the board has the authority to impose fines. The more complicated answer is that the board has not set a fine structure. So while they have the power to fine, there is no fine to be fined.
But if we could then identify it, we could formulate a structure and then do it. But finding out who does it is the hard part.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Second observation, I guess. I read the Cape Gazette all the time, and I never see any reporting on the BPW, other than an announcement of when the meetings are going to be. And you were talking about not getting good PR. Could you invite them to the meetings?
No, they usually attend
Oh, do they?
virtually. Yeah. Nick
Is
Ross
anyone,
used
is
to.
anyone,
Okay.
is anyone on?
No,
Justin?
I looked at that.
No.
No, Nick hasn't been on tonight.
Well, there's a new reporter.
Yeah.
But who is it?
I believe is it Aaron Mushrush?
Mushrush, yeah.
Yes.
There has not been any.
Likewise, they have the ability to look at this in recorded session as well, so.
It's recorded. So. No, I know Nick used to do
Yeah.
that, listen to the recorded.
Okay. Third, I'm just curious whether there was any contact made with Phoenixville about their wastewater treatment plant.
I have a call in
Yes.
coming from Phoenixville.
Yes, right,
So
right.
The city manager tried to call me back last week, but I was away. So I'm going to, it actually is not in operation yet,
Okay.
but it is, it is in construction, and it's been delayed because of supply chain and COVID.
Right. Yes.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks for bringing that up the other
Yeah.
night. Yeah.
Oh,
I read that article. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
it was, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Second, I was wondering if there's going to be anything published on the progress on making a decision of which of the three options you're going to go with.
At some point,
or-
definitely.
Yeah. And is that something that this mitigation committee is going to be involved with, or?
That's something different.
Probably, I mean,
Well,
depending
yeah,
on,
they'll
if we
be
get-
involved,
if we
yeah,
do,
not directly.
depending on, if we go to hardening or something
Yeah,
like that.
yes.
Yeah.
But given that the mitigation committee hasn't started yet, it's really more of an engineering decision and a financial decision as to which option to choose.
We're still developing data and understanding what the deal is and what they're offering and what we have to do and how we're going to bill it.
Yeah.
All the details are, there's
There's
still
a-
a lot of them out there.
There's a lot of concern about Sussex County.
Oh,
Yeah.
we understand that.
Okay.
That's the reason we did what we did. We tried to bring it early to get a feel for the temperature in the room to see what the feeling was. And
It was a great idea.
yeah,
Yeah, much appreciated, very much appreciated. And last thing is, if you're looking for local volunteers for the mitigation committee, I would be willing to be considered.
great.
So it can give you my business card.
Absolutely. Thank
Do you
you.
have a background in the area? What is just interest or what is your,
It's a little
go ahead.
A little bit of both. My background is in environmental science
Oh, great.
and
Good start.
yeah. And I currently work part-time for a company I've worked for years. I'm involved in Superfund cleanups and that sort of thing, overseeing the consultants and, dealing with the state and that sort of thing. But, years ago, I was involved in industrial wastewater treatment, but not residential or municipal. So,
That's the hard stuff.
yeah.
Well, that's great. We'll get together and talk then.
Okay, good.
Great. Thank you for coming and thanks for
Thanks for,
the questions and
Yeah.
suggestions.
Definitely.
Okay. Call to the press. I guess the press is not present.
Not present.
Okay, do I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
All in favor?
bye.
Aye.